This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I still can't sleep when it rains. It's been 44 years, but every time I hear water drumming on a roof, I'm right back there at Mount Rainier, watching that poor woman stumbling through the campground. I was 19 that weekend in May of '79. My buddy Tom and I had driven up from Portland for Memorial Day weekend, thinking we'd do some hiking and fishing at the national park. We weren't serious outdoorsmen or anything, just college freshmen with a borrowed tent and more beer than actual camping supplies. Tom's dad had raved about Sunshine Point Campground, how beautiful it was with the Nisqually River nearby. We arrived Friday afternoon and set up our spot as far from families as possible. We didn't want to bother anyone when we inevitably got rowdy. The weather forecast had warned about rain, but in the Pacific Northwest, that's just part of the deal. By evening, it was coming down pretty steady. Not a downpour yet, but persistent enough that most campers retreated to their tents early. Tom and I were sitting under our tarp, passing a bottle back and forth and talking about nothing important, when I first noticed her. It was maybe 9 o'clock, already dark with the cloud cover. This woman was just wandering between campsites, no flashlight or anything. At first I thought maybe she was drunk like us, looking for her tent, but something about the way she moved set off alarm bells. She was soaked through, and I don't mean just from the rain. Her clothes looked like she'd gone swimming fully dressed. "Hey Tom," I nudged him. "Look at that lady. Something's wrong." She had this medium-sized dog with her, some kind of retriever mix, also completely drenched. The dog kept circling around her legs, whining. We watched her stop at the edge of our campsite's light, swaying slightly. Her hair was plastered to her head, dark with water. She was younger than I initially thought, maybe mid-20s. "Are you okay?" I called out. She turned toward us, and I still remember how wide her eyes were. Not frightened exactly, more like someone who'd just woken up somewhere unfamiliar. She opened her mouth like she was going to say something, but what came out was... I don't know how to describe it. Not words, not sentences that made any sense anyway. Just fragments, mumbled phrases. Tom and I exchanged looks. We weren't sure if we should approach her or not. Neither of us was sober enough to make great decisions, but we were clear-headed enough to recognize someone in distress. "Do you need help finding your campsite?" Tom asked, standing up. The woman stared at him for a long moment, then suddenly blurted out, "The water isn't right." Her voice was hoarse, like she'd been screaming. "It's not supposed to go that way." We had no idea what she meant. Tom took a step toward her, and she immediately backed away, clutching at her dog's wet fur. "We can call the ranger station," I offered, though I had no idea how we'd actually do that without driving somewhere. Cell phones weren't a thing yet. She shook her head violently, water spraying from her hair. "They changed it," she said, suddenly sounding more coherent. "Someone changed it. It's not right now." Then she looked down at her dog and whispered something I couldn't hear. An older couple from the neighboring campsite had noticed the commotion and came over with a flashlight. The husband, a guy in his 50s with a big beard, approached carefully. "Miss, are you all right? Do you need medical help?" The beam of his flashlight fully illuminated her, and I sucked in my breath. Her jeans and flannel shirt weren't just wet. They were stained with something dark that might have been mud, or worse. There were scratches on her face and hands. The dog looked okay physically, but was clearly distressed, sticking close to her side. "I need to get back," she said more clearly now. My stuff, my van, not safe here. The bearded guy's wife stepped forward. Honey, you're soaking wet. Why don't you come sit by our fire for a bit? We have some coffee. For a second, it seemed like the woman might accept the help. She hesitated, looking at the warm glow of their campfire. Then her face changed, like she suddenly remembered something urgent. No, she said sharply. No, I need to get back. They might still be there. Who might be there? I asked. She looked right through me, like I wasn't even there. The ones who changed the water. Then she turned and started walking quickly away, her dog trotting beside her. She headed toward what I assumed was her campsite, disappearing into the rainy darkness. The bearded guy looked troubled. I'm going to walk over to the ranger station, he said. That woman needs help. Looks like hypothermia, maybe. His wife nodded. Might be drugs, too. Did you see her eyes? I had seen her eyes. They were alert, but wrong somehow. Like she was seeing things we couldn't. Tom and I went back to our beers, but the mood was killed. We talked about the woman, wondering what had happened to her. Had she fallen in the river? Been attacked by something? We eventually crashed in our tent around midnight, the rain picking up intensity, drumming on the nylon above us. The next morning, we woke to commotion. 2 ranger vehicles were parked in the campground loop, and a small crowd had gathered. Tom and I wandered over, curious and a little hungover. The bearded guy from last night spotted us and waved us over. They can't find her, he said grimly. The woman from last night? Tom asked. He nodded. I told the rangers about her behavior. They went to check her campsite this morning. Everything's there. Tent, sleeping bag, cooler. But no sign of her or her dog. A female ranger was asking people if they'd seen or heard anything unusual during the night. When it was our turn, we described our interaction with the woman, how wet she was, what she'd said about the water not being right. Did she mention where she was? Camping specifically? The ranger asked. We shook our heads. Did she seem like she might harm herself? That question hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't considered that possibility. No, I said, though I wasn't really sure. She seemed confused, not suicidal. The bearded guy's wife joined the conversation. She mentioned a van, right? Said something about needing to get back to her van? The ranger made notes. Yes, we found her vehicle about a mile down the road. A '68 Volkswagen van with California plates. Looks like she walked from there to the campground for some reason. By midday, more officials had arrived. Sheriff's deputies, search and rescue teams with dogs. They fanned out from her campsite, focusing especially on the area near the Nisqually River. The rain had finally stopped, but the ground was saturated and the river was running high and fast. Tom and I decided to join one of the search parties. I couldn't stop thinking about her face, those eyes. We spent hours combing through underbrush, calling out her name, which we'd learned was Elaine, but found nothing. No footprints, no scraps of clothing caught on branches. Nothing. When we returned to the main campground area, I overheard 2 deputies talking. The river's the most likely explanation, but no signs along the banks? Not even the dog? Currents strong enough to sweep them miles downstream. Might never find them if that's what happened. Later that afternoon, they brought in what looked like Elaine's belongings from her tent, a sleeping bag, some clothes, a journal. I glimpsed the journal as a ranger carried it to his vehicle. It was one of those hardcover types with a marbled cover. For some reason, that small detail hit me hard. This was a real person with a life and thoughts and plans. not just some creepy campground story. A deputy interviewed Tom and me more formally, asking about everything we could remember. Had she mentioned anyone else? Any places? Any specific threats? We told him about her comments regarding the water and someone changing it, but that was all we had. Sounds like she might have been having some kind of episode, the deputy said. Maybe drugs, maybe mental health. But something about that explanation didn't sit right with me. Her fear had seemed specific, directed at something concrete, not generalized paranoia. That night, Tom and I debated whether to stay or leave. The whole campground had this heavy, somber feeling now. Most of the families with kids had packed up and left, but we decided to stick around one more night. I don't know why. Maybe some misguided feeling that we owed it to Elaine to see things through. The search continued the next day, but with diminishing intensity. By Monday, Memorial Day, they'd scaled back to just a few rangers checking areas they hadn't covered thoroughly. We overheard that they'd contacted Elaine's family in Oregon and California. She'd been driving up from San Luis Obispo, apparently alone except for her dog. Before we left that afternoon, I walked over to where her tent still stood. They'd left her campsite intact in case she somehow returned. It was a simple dome tent, dark green. Her camp chair sat empty beside the cold fire pit. A paperback novel lay open, face down on the chair arm, its pages swollen from the rain. I stood there for a long time, trying to make sense of it all. The rain had washed away any tracks she might have left, but surely something should have remained, some sign of where she went, what happened to her. As I turned to go, something caught my eye. A small notebook, different from the journal they'd taken, wedged under the edge of her tent. I shouldn't have touched it, but I did. I picked it up and quickly flipped through it. Most pages contained normal camping notes, lists of supplies, rough maps, reminders, but the last entry, dated the day she disappeared, contained just 5 words. They're changing the river's course. I stared at that sentence, goosebumps rising on my arms despite the mild temperature. I should have given the notebook to the rangers, but something stopped me. Instead, I slipped it into my pocket before heading back to our campsite. I've kept it all these years, though I've never shown it to anyone until now. Tom and I drove back to Portland that evening, mostly silent. We'd come for a fun weekend and left with something dark and unresolved hanging over us. In the weeks that followed, I checked newspapers for updates on Elaine's case, but the stories quickly faded. Just another wilderness disappearance, presumed drowned. But I've never believed that explanation, not completely. I've returned to Mount Rainier many times over the decades, and I always make a point to drive past where Sunshine Point Campground used to be. I say used to be because, ironically, in 2006, the Nisqually River flooded catastrophically, washing away that entire campground. The river literally changed course, just as Elaine had written. I still wonder what Elaine saw or experienced that night. What made her so wet, so terrified? What did she mean about them changing the water? And how did she and her dog vanish so completely, leaving absolutely no trace behind? I don't have answers, but every time it rains at night, I remember her eyes, wild and knowing, and I wonder if, somehow, she saw something coming, something about that place, about that river, decades before the rest of us understood. Story 2. I've been debating whether to post this for a long time. It's been almost 4 years, but I still wake up in cold sweats thinking about it, about Danny, and about how close I came to being another headline in our local paper. I met Danny freshman year of college when we were randomly assigned as roommates. We hit it off immediately. He was this free-spirited guy who could make friends with anyone. After freshman year, we got an apartment together sophomore and junior year. By senior year, I'd gotten a studio apartment closer to campus while Danny wanted something cheaper, even if it meant living further away. That's when he found the listing for this 2-bedroom place about 2 miles from campus. It was in this old house that had been converted into apartments, the kind with peeling paint and a landlord who clearly did the bare minimum. The rent was ridiculously cheap, which should have been our first warning sign. I found a roommate already, Danny told me when I helped him move in. Some guy who graduated last year but is sticking around town, Tommy something. The landlord connected us. I remember the first time I met Tommy. It was moving day, and I was helping Danny carry a futon up the narrow staircase with its stained carpet. Tommy was coming down as we were struggling up. He was this big guy, not fat, just large, with broad shoulders and these massive hands. He had dark hair that hung past his ears, and when Danny introduced us, all Tommy did was nod his chin slightly. No smile, no "nice to meet you," nothing. Just these empty eyes staring at me for a beat too long before he continued down the stairs. That night at my place, I told Danny something felt off about Tommy. "Dude's giving me serious serial killer vibes," I said, only half joking. Danny just laughed. "He's just not a big talker, and the rent's dirt cheap. Besides, we both work different schedules, so I'll barely see him." Looking back, I wish I'd pushed harder. I wish I'd made Danny reconsider, but I didn't. I just let it go. About a week after moving in, Danny mentioned something that should have been another red flag. We were grabbing lunch between classes when he said, "Tommy hates my alarm clock." Danny was impossible to wake up. Normal alarms didn't work for him. He'd sleep right through them. His solution was this iPod docking station that blasted heavy metal at full volume. His go-to wake-up song was Pantera's The Great Southern Trendkill. If you've ever heard it, you know it starts with this blood-curdling scream. It was effective, but Jesus, it would wake the dead. He says it wakes him up and then he can't fall back asleep, Danny continued, taking a bite of his sandwich. "But I can't help it, man. It's the only thing that works." I asked if Tommy had been upset about it. "He's not happy," Danny shrugged. "But what can I do? I've got early classes." The next time I came over, about 2 weeks after Danny moved in, I noticed a yellow Post-it note on the fridge that said, "Silence is golden," in jagged, all-caps handwriting. I pointed it out to Danny, who just rolled his eyes. "Yeah, Tommy's been leaving those. There was one on the bathroom mirror yesterday, too." "That's weird, man," I said. "Have you tried talking to him about it?" "He's never around when I'm awake," Danny said. "Our schedules don't line up. I leave for class before he gets up, and he works nights at that warehouse on Route 9. A month into the semester, I stopped by unexpectedly one evening to drop off some notes Danny had left in my car. Tommy answered the door. He didn't say anything, just stood there blocking the entrance. Is Danny home?" I asked, feeling immediately uncomfortable. Tommy stared at me for a moment before stepping aside. "Sleeping," he finally said. His voice was deeper than I expected and completely flat. Danny was indeed napping on the couch. When I woke him up, he seemed disoriented. "Tommy was just standing there?" he whispered after I told him about the weird encounter. "That's odd." "Has he been acting strange?" I pressed. Danny hesitated, then admitted, "I woke up at like 3 in the morning a couple nights ago and found him just standing outside my bedroom door. He said he thought he heard something, but..." He trailed off. "Dude, that's not normal. You need to get out of here." Danny laughed it off. The rent's too good, man, and it's not like he's done anything threatening. 2 months into the semester, things escalated. Danny texted me saying Tommy had disconnected his iPod dock while he was in the shower, making him late for class. Another time, he found all the batteries removed from his backup alarm clock. "You can crash on my couch," I offered, "just until you find a new place." "It's not that bad," Danny insisted. "He's just particular about noise." The last time I saw Danny alive was on a Monday night. We grabbed dinner, and he seemed tired. He mentioned Tommy had been extra weird lately. Apparently, he'd caught Tommy in his room going through his things. When confronted, Tommy claimed he was looking for the noise. "The noise?" I asked. "That's what he calls my alarm, just the noise." Danny shook his head. "I told him to stay out of my room." I begged him again to leave. "This guy is bad news, Danny. Just stay at my place tonight, and we'll figure something out tomorrow." But Danny, always stubborn, insisted he was overreacting. "It's fine. He's weird, but harmless. Besides, I've got an early class tomorrow." That was the last thing he ever said to me. Tuesday came and went without a text from Danny, which was unusual. He always sent memes or complained about his professors. By evening, I'd called him 3 times with no answer. Something felt wrong in my gut. I drove to his apartment around 8 o'clock. The lights were on, but Danny's car was still in the lot, which made no sense. He should have been at his evening lab. I knocked, but no one answered. Then I tried the doorknob and found it unlocked. The apartment was eerily quiet when I stepped inside. The only light came from the TV in the living room, casting this blue flickering glow across everything. It smelled wrong, metallic and sour. "Danny?" I called out. No answer. His bedroom door was partially open. I pushed it further, and that's when my entire world collapsed. Danny was on his bed. At first, in the dim light, I thought he was sleeping, but then I noticed the dark stain spread across his sheets. His throat had been cut open, not a clean slice, but this jagged, ugly gash that looked like it had been hacked with something dull. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. The iPod docking station lay smashed to pieces on the floor. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. Then I heard the floorboards creak behind me. Tommy was standing in the hallway. His shirt had dark stains on it. His face was completely blank, showing no emotion whatsoever. "He couldn't stop," Tommy said in that flat voice. "That noise. Every morning. I asked him. I warned him." He took a step toward me, and I noticed something in his hand, a kitchen knife with a dried brownish substance on the blade. His eyes flicked to the broken alarm clock, then back to me. "You heard it too, didn't you? You know how it was." Something snapped me out of my paralysis. I bolted for the door, fumbling with the handle as my sweaty hands slipped on the knob. I could hear Tommy's heavy footsteps behind me, unhurried but steady. I made it to my car, hands shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice before managing to start the engine. As I peeled out of the parking lot, I looked in my rearview mirror and saw Tommy standing in the street, just watching me drive away with that same empty expression. I called 911 from the nearest gas station, sobbing and barely coherent. The police arrested Tommy that night. They found him sitting calmly on the couch, watching TV as if nothing had happened. The murder weapon was in the kitchen sink, still unwashed. Later, the police told me that based on the coroner's report, Danny had been killed around 6 in the morning when his alarm went off, which meant Tommy had spent the entire day in that apartment with Danny's body just waiting. During the investigation, They discovered Tommy had left a job in another town after a workplace incident involving a coworker who played a radio too loudly. His previous roommate had moved out suddenly, leaving no forwarding address. There were complaints from neighbors at his old apartment about him standing outside their doors at night. At his trial, Tommy showed no remorse. He kept saying the noise had to stop and that he had given fair warning. He was sentenced to life without parole. Sometimes I wonder if I could have prevented it, if I had insisted more strongly that Danny leave that apartment, or if I'd reported Tommy's behavior to someone. I replay our last conversation over and over, wishing I'd physically dragged Danny back to my place that night. I've moved away from that college town now. I can't stand to be anywhere near it. I'm in therapy, working through the trauma and the guilt. But there are still nights when I wake up in a panic, thinking I hear footsteps outside my bedroom door. Nights when I imagine what would have happened if I'd arrived at the apartment earlier that day, or if Tommy had decided 2 victims were better than 1. And whenever someone's alarm goes off, especially one with music, I feel this cold sweat break out all over my body, because all I can think about is Danny and how his alarm clock cost him his life. I don't know why I'm sharing this now, maybe as a warning. If something feels wrong about a person, really wrong down in your gut, listen to that feeling. Don't rationalize it away. Don't dismiss it because the rent is cheap or because you think you're overreacting. Danny didn't listen, and I'll never stop hearing that silence that followed. Story 3. I still can't believe how quickly everything spiraled out of control that day. It's been a few months, but my hands still get shaky when I think about it. It was supposed to be just another workout session at Oakbrook Park. Me and my buddy Mikey had been going there every Tuesday and Thursday. For about 6 months, nothing fancy, just some bodyweight exercises in the grassy area near the basketball courts. The weather was perfect that day. Not too hot, slight breeze, just enough clouds to keep the sun from cooking us. We'd finished our routine and were packing up our stuff when I realized my phone wasn't in my pocket. You know that immediate panic that hits you? That sinking feeling in your gut? I patted all my pockets like an idiot, as if it would magically appear. "Dude, I think I left my phone back in the grass," I told Mikey. I remembered setting it down when we were doing planks because it was digging into my hip. We turned around and started walking back to our workout spot, which was maybe 100 yards away. That's when I saw him, this guy in a gray hoodie, bent over in the exact spot where we'd been exercising. At first, I thought maybe he was just picking up trash or something, but then I saw him straighten up and look at something in his hand. My phone. I just knew it was my phone. "Hey!" I shouted, waving my arm. The guy's head snapped up and our eyes met for a split second. I'll never forget the look on his face, not guilt or surprise, but this cold calculation, like he was deciding something, and then he just turned and started walking away, fast. "Hey!" I yelled louder. "That's my phone." He didn't even look back, just picked up his pace and then broke into a jog. "Is that dude seriously stealing your phone?" Mikey asked, but I was already moving. "Come on." I started running after the guy and Mikey followed. The thief looked over his shoulder, saw us coming, and went into a full sprint toward the parking lot. By the time we reached the lot, he was already climbing into an old blue Honda Civic. I caught a glimpse of the license plate as he peeled out. It started with JGH and had a dent in the rear bumper. My brain was somehow taking mental pictures of everything even while I was freaking out. "My car," I panted, pointing to the other end of the lot. We ran to my Subaru and jumped in. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" Mikey asked as I reversed out of the spot. "That's my whole life in that phone, man," I said. "All my banking apps, my work emails, my photos, everything. Not to mention it was a brand new iPhone I was still paying off." We caught sight of the blue Civic turning right out of the park entrance. I followed, staying a few car lengths back. My heart was hammering in my chest. I'd never done anything like this before, but something in me just refused to let this guy get away with it. The Civic weaved through traffic, taking a series of turns that led us away from the main roads and into a residential area I wasn't familiar with. Tree-lined streets with modest homes, the kind of neighborhood where nothing exciting ever happens. Until now, I guess. "He's slowing down," Mikey said, leaning forward in his seat. The Civic turned onto Maple Street according to the street sign and then pulled into a driveway about halfway down the block. It was a small one-story house with peeling yellow paint and overgrown bushes in the front yard. I parked a few houses down, my mind racing. What was I even planning to do? Confront a phone thief at his house. In retrospect, it was stupid, but at the time, I was running on pure adrenaline. "Let's just talk to him," I said to Mikey. "Tell him we know he has my phone and we just want it back. No cops, no trouble." Mikey didn't look convinced, but he nodded. "I've got your back, but let's be careful, okay?" We got out of the car and walked toward the house. The guy was still sitting in his car, doing something with his hands, probably messing with my phone. When he saw us approaching, he quickly got out and started walking to his front door, keeping his face turned away. "Hey," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "I know you took my phone back at the park. I just want it back, that's all." The guy stopped at his door and finally turned to face us. He was older than I'd thought, maybe in his late 30s, with a patchy beard and bloodshot eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice raspy. "You've got the wrong guy." "We literally watched you pick it up and run," Mikey said. "We're not trying to cause problems, just give the phone back." The guy's eyes darted between us, then to the street behind us. "I didn't take anything. Get off my property before I call the cops." "That's fine," I said, pulling my own bluff. "Let's call them. I've already tracked my phone to this address anyway." That was a lie. My phone was turned off, or I would have tried that already. Something changed in his face then, a flash of panic that confirmed he definitely had my phone. "Last chance," he said, opening his front door. "Get lost." Then he went inside and slammed the door shut. I looked at Mikey. Now what? "Maybe we should just call the police and let them handle it," he suggested. He was right, but I was so close. "Let's just knock one more time. Maybe he'll realize we're serious." We walked up to the front door and I knocked firmly. We waited. I knocked again, louder this time. The door swung open, but it wasn't just the guy from the park. Now there was a woman with him, thin, with stringy blonde hair and the same bloodshot eyes. And they were both holding baseball bats. "I told you to get the fuck off my property," the man shouted, taking a step forward and raising the bat. My stomach dropped to my feet. This was way more than I'd bargained for. I grabbed Mikey's arm and started backing away. We're going," I said, raising my hands. The woman was staring at us with this manic intensity that scared me more than the bats. There was something not right about her eyes, pupils like pinpoints. "You picked the wrong house to mess with," she hissed, tapping her bat against the doorframe. "We know where you parked. Maybe we'll pay your car a visit after you leave." We backpedaled to the sidewalk, then turned and walked as quickly as we could without running back to my car. I could feel their eyes boring into my back the whole way. "Holy shit," Mikey whispered once we were inside. "Those people are on something." My hands were shaking so bad I dropped my keys twice before I could start the car. I pulled away from the curb and drove to the end of the street before stopping. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice cracking a little. "Call the cops, obviously," Mikey said. "Those people are dangerous, and they have your phone." He was right. I borrowed his phone and dialed 911. "911, what's your emergency?" "I'd like to report a theft," I said, and explained the situation, how we'd followed the thief to his house and been threatened with baseball bats when we tried to get my phone back. The dispatcher took down all the information, including the address and description of the house. "Officers are on their way," she assured me. "Please remain in your vehicle and do not approach the residence again. The officers will contact you when they arrive." We parked at the corner where we could see the house but weren't too close. About 10 minutes later, 2 police cruisers pulled up, lights flashing but no sirens. One parked in front of the house, the other at the back corner where I guess there was an alley or something. From our vantage point, we could see the officers approach the front door. One knocked while the other stood to the side, hand near his holster. There was no answer at first. The officer knocked again, louder. Suddenly, the back door of the house burst open and the guy from the park came sprinting out. He made it about 20 feet before the officer waiting in the back tackled him to the ground. Even from a distance I could see him struggling, but the officer had him cuffed within seconds. The woman answered the front door then, without the baseball bat, this time. She seemed to be trying to act normal, but the officers weren't buying it. While one talked to her, the other went inside the house. My phone rang. Well, Mikey's phone, which I was still holding. It was the police asking us to come over. As we approached, I could see the guy sitting in the back of one of the cruisers, glaring daggers at me through the window. "Lucas?" one of the officers asked. I nodded. "We found this in the suspect's pocket." He held up my phone in an evidence bag. "Can you unlock it to verify it's yours?" I did, and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding when my home screen appeared. The officer explained they'd need to keep it as evidence for now, but I could pick it up from the station in a day or two. "What's going to happen to them?" I asked, nodding toward the house. The officer's expression was grim. "Let's just say the phone was the least of their problems. When we did a sweep of the house, we found quite a bit of methamphetamine and some stolen property that matches descriptions from other recent thefts in the area." While we were talking, more police cars arrived, along with an unmarked vehicle. Detectives, probably. They led the woman out in handcuffs, too, and she was screaming obscenities at everyone. "You got lucky," the officer told us before we left. "These aren't people you want to mess with. Next time, just call us from the start, okay?" I nodded, feeling a weird mix of relief and lingering fear. On the drive home, Mikey and I were mostly quiet, processing what had happened. "Can you imagine if they'd invited us inside?" Mikey finally said. "Or if they'd followed through on that threat to mess with your car?" I couldn't stop thinking about it. Over a phone. Just a stupid phone that could have cost us way more than its dollar value. I picked up my phone from the police station 2 days later. When I turned it on, I had a notification that someone had tried to access my banking app multiple times. The thought of that guy scrolling through my photos, reading my messages, trying to get into my accounts. It made my skin crawl. I've changed all my passwords since then. I don't work out at Oakbrook Park anymore. I've got a death grip on my phone whenever I'm in public. And sometimes, when I'm driving, I check my rearview mirror a little more often than I used to, half expecting to see a blue Honda Civic with a dented bumper. All because I set my phone down for a few minutes on a normal Tuesday afternoon. That's how fast your whole sense of safety can disappear. Story 4. I've been putting off sharing this story for ages because it still creeps me out so badly, but I think I need to finally get it off my chest. This happened about 10 years ago when I was 9 years old, and even though so much time has passed, I still get chills thinking about it. Back then, soccer was pretty much my whole life. I was on this team with a bunch of other girls my age, and we'd have games almost every weekend. My parents never missed a game. My dad was super invested and would cheer way too loudly, which was totally embarrassing, but also kind of nice. Anyway, this particular Saturday started out completely normal. It was early fall, I remember, because I was wearing my favorite long-sleeve shirt under my jersey since there was a slight chill in the air. Our team was playing against a rival school from the next town over. We were all pumped up because we'd lost to them the previous season. I remember scanning the bleachers before the game started, seeing all the usual parents with their coffee thermoses and folding chairs. That's when I first noticed him, a man sitting by himself at the very end of the bleachers. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe he was someone's uncle or a coach from another team checking us out. But something felt off. He wasn't talking to anyone else, and he kept looking at our team, specifically. During water breaks, I'd glance over and catch him still watching. Not the game, us, the girls. He didn't cheer when goals were scored, he just observed. He was wearing a dark blue jacket and jeans, nothing remarkable, but his intense focus made my stomach feel weird. After the game, we won by the way, my friend Sarah invited a bunch of us over to her house in Millbrook to hang out. This was our normal Saturday routine. Whoever's parents were willing to host would have us all over after games. I remember my mom saying she'd pick me up around 6 that evening, giving me plenty of time to celebrate our win with my friends. There were 6 of us total who went to Sarah's that day. Me, Sarah, Emma, Zoe, Jasmine, and Madison. We were all still hyped up from winning, so when we got to Sarah's house, we didn't go inside right away. Instead, we grabbed some juice boxes from her kitchen and went back outside to kick around a ball in her front yard. That's when I saw him again. Across the street, parked about 3 houses down, was this brownish silver sedan. Not super old, but definitely not new either. The windows were slightly tinted, but not so dark that I couldn't see who was behind the wheel. It was the same man from the soccer field, just sitting there, staring directly at us. My heart started pounding really hard. At first, I thought maybe I was being paranoid or something. I mean, what were the chances? So I nudged Sarah and whispered, "Hey, do you know that guy? The one in that car over there?" Sarah looked over, squinting in the afternoon sun. "No. Why would I know him? He was at our game earlier, and now he's here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Sarah frowned. "That's weird. Maybe he lives around here?" "Maybe," I said, but I didn't believe it. The way he was just sitting there, engine off, not even pretending to be doing anything else but watching us, it felt wrong. I glanced at the others who were still passing the ball, back and forth, completely oblivious. I didn't want to freak everyone out, but I also didn't want to keep playing outside with that guy watching us. "Let's go inside," I suggested, trying to sound casual. "It's getting kind of chilly out here." Thankfully, no one argued. We all headed inside, and I tried to push the strange man out of my mind. Sarah's house was really nice. Her parents had money, and they'd recently renovated. Her bedroom was upstairs in the back of the house, overlooking their backyard. It was huge compared to mine, with a big TV mounted on the wall. We decided to watch some movie. I can't even remember what it was now. Something with talking animals, I think. We were all sprawled across Sarah's bed and the floor, just being silly girls, laughing and throwing popcorn at each other. About 20 minutes into the movie, I had almost forgotten about the man. Sarah's mom had brought us up some snacks, and we were all comfortable and relaxed. The bedroom window was partially open because the room got stuffy with 6 of us in there, and a light breeze was coming through. Then I heard it, a soft, deliberate tapping sound, like fingernails on glass. At first, I thought maybe it was a branch from the tree near the window, but when I looked over, my entire body went cold. There, peering through the gap in the curtains, was the man's face. He was smiling. Not just any smile, this wide, unnatural grin that made my skin crawl. And he was waving, like we were supposed to be happy to see him. I couldn't even scream at first. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. Then Emma saw where I was looking and let out this piercing shriek that snapped me out of my frozen state. We all started screaming at once. "There's a man at the window!" I finally managed to shout, pointing frantically. The man's expression changed when we started screaming. His smile dropped, but he didn't run away immediately. For a few terrifying seconds, he just kept staring at us with this blank look that was somehow worse than the smile. Sarah was the first to move, lunging for her bedroom door. "Dad! Mom! Help!" We could hear footsteps thundering up the stairs as Sarah's parents rushed to respond to our screams. When I looked back at the window, the man was gone. Sarah's dad burst into the room, looking panicked. "What happened? What's going on?" All of us were talking at once, crying and pointing at the window. Sarah's mom started counting heads, making sure we were all there and okay, while her dad went to the window to look out. "There was a man looking in at us," Sarah sobbed. "The same one Lily saw at the soccer game and outside in the car." Her dad's face went deadly serious. He sprinted out of the room, and we heard the front door slam moments later. Sarah's mom stayed with us, trying to calm us down while calling the police on her cell phone. She kept asking questions. What did he look like? Had anyone seen him before today? Did he say anything or try to open the window? The reality of what had just happened was sinking in, and I felt like I was going to throw up. This man had followed us from the soccer field. He had somehow figured out which house we went to, and worst of all, he had somehow known exactly which window to go to, the one that led to the room where we were all gathered. How long had he been watching us? Had he been peeking in before we noticed him? The thought made me feel violated in a way I didn't fully understand at that age. Sarah's dad came back inside a few minutes later, looking frustrated and worried. "He's gone. I saw a car speeding away down Maple Street, but I couldn't catch the license plate. The police arrived about 15 minutes later. By then, all our parents had been called to come pick us up early. The officers talked to each of us individually, asking us to describe the man as best we could. I remember feeling so helpless because my description felt so generic. Brown hair, maybe in his 30s or 40s, average height. The only distinct thing I could remember was that unsettling smile. One officer stayed outside searching around the house while the other took our statements. They found footprints in the soft soil beneath Sarah's window and confirmed that someone had definitely been standing there. There was also a ladder from Sarah's garage that had been moved and placed against the side of the house. That's how he had reached the second-floor window. That detail still makes my stomach turn. He hadn't just impulsively followed us. He had planned enough to find and use a ladder to reach us. My mom arrived while the police were still there. I've never seen her look so scared and angry at the same time. She hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, then immediately started asking the officers what they were going to do to find this guy. The ride home was silent. I could tell my mom wanted to talk about it, but she must have seen how shaken up I was and decided to wait. That night, my dad checked all our locks 3 times before bed. I slept in my parents' room for the next week. The police never found the man. They increased patrols around our neighborhood and the soccer fields for a while. But eventually, things went back to normal, except they didn't, not really. Our parents started taking turns watching our soccer practices. No more going to friends' houses without detailed plans and constant check-ins. Sarah's family installed a security system the very next week. For months afterward, I'd wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I'd heard tapping at my window. I'd freeze in my bed, too terrified to even look. Sometimes I still do. The thing that haunts me most, even all these years later, is that I have no idea what would have happened if we hadn't noticed him when we did. Was he planning to try and get in? Was he just trying to scare us? And why us? 6 random 9-year-old girls. I'm 19 now, but I still check behind the shower curtain every time. I go into a bathroom. I still can't sleep with my window uncovered, even on the hottest summer nights. And I still feel my heart race whenever I notice someone watching me for too long. I don't know if he's still out there somewhere, or if he moved on to scare other children. All I know is that the image of his face in that window, with that horrible smile and those empty eyes, will stay with me forever. And I still wonder sometimes if one day I'll hear that tapping sound again. Story 5. I don't even know where to begin with this. Typing it out feels surreal, like I'm finally admitting that this nightmare actually happened. My name is Sam Duball. I'm 33, a doctor with a Harvard medical degree, and last month I started as an assistant professor in anthropology at UW. All my life I've been the responsible one, the guy who plans everything, who studies the map twice, who brings extra supplies, and now I'm the guy who disappeared. It was Columbus Day weekend in October 2020. After weeks of settling into my new position at the university, I badly needed some time in the mountains to clear my head. The Mother Mountain Loop at Rainier had been on my bucket list for ages. 17 miles of pure wilderness with stunning views of the mountain, perfect for an overnight trek. I've hiked solo in the Himalayas, for crying out loud. This was supposed to be straightforward. I packed everything properly. Tent, sleeping bag rated for below freezing, extra warm clothes, rain gear, compass, paper maps, GPS device, extra batteries, first aid kit, water purification, more than enough food, the works. My sister Dina even teased me about overpacking when I sent her my gear list the night before. The morning of October 10th was clear and crisp. Perfect hiking weather. I parked at Mowich Lake around 7 in the morning. The lot was maybe a quarter full, but most people seemed to be heading for shorter day hikes. I remember feeling that rush of excitement as I locked my car, adjusted my pack, and hit the trail. The first few hours were uneventful, exactly what I expected. The trail winds through these gorgeous old-growth forests with rays of light filtering through. I passed a couple of groups early on, exchanged the usual hiker pleasantries. Around noon, I stopped at a clearing for lunch and to take some photos of Rainier. The mountain was stunning that day, not a cloud in sight, which is rare for October. By mid-afternoon, I'd covered about 7 miles and was making great time. I remember checking my GPS and feeling satisfied with my progress. The trail gets more remote after the junction at Spray Park, and that's when things started to feel different. Not wrong, exactly, just different. The temperature dropped noticeably, and fog started rolling in. Not unusual for these mountains. Weather changes fast up there. I put on my extra layer and kept moving. The fog thickened so quickly that visibility dropped to maybe 50 feet within minutes. I wasn't worried, though. I had my GPS, compass, and knew the trail well from studying the maps. Around 4 in the afternoon, I noticed something odd. The fog had this strange quality to it, almost like it was pulsing. I know how that sounds, but it's the only way I can describe it. Like it was breathing. I remember stopping and watching it for a few minutes, mesmerized. The silence was absolute. No birds, no wind, nothing. Just me and this weird, pulsing fog. I shook it off and kept hiking, but that's when I realized the trail markers had become harder to find. I started checking my GPS more frequently. The device showed I was still on the trail, but something felt off about my surroundings. The trees looked different, older, more twisted. The undergrowth seemed denser than what I'd seen earlier on the same loop. Around 5, I had my first real moment of concern. My GPS started glitching. The screen would freeze, then jump to show me in completely different locations. I tried rebooting it, but it kept showing me jumping all over the map. No problem, I thought. I have my compass and paper maps. Except when I pulled out my compass, the needle was spinning wildly. That's when the first surge of real fear hit me. I'm not someone who panics easily, but something about this situation felt fundamentally wrong. I decided to make camp while I still had some daylight left. I found a small clearing that seemed relatively flat and started setting up my tent. As I was hammering in the stakes, I noticed marks on some of the surrounding trees, not trailblazes, but strange, intricate patterns carved into the bark. They looked old, weathered, but definitely man-made. I took out my phone to snap a photo, but the battery had drained completely. It had been at 80% just an hour earlier. The fog was getting thicker and daylight was fading fast. I finished setting up camp, got inside my tent, and tried to calm myself with some food and hot tea from my thermos. The silence outside was deafening. No animal sounds at all. In all my years of wilderness experience, I'd never encountered such absolute silence in a forest. I must have dozed off eventually, though I don't remember falling asleep. What woke me was a sound I still can't explain, like a low humming that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The inside of my tent was illuminated by a faint, pulsing blue light filtering through the fabric. My watch said it was just after midnight. I unzipped the tent just enough to peek outside. The fog had become almost solid-looking, and it was glowing, a soft blue phosphorescence that made everything look alien and unreal. But what made my blood run cold were the shadows moving through the fog, tall, slender shapes that seemed to glide rather than walk. I zipped the tent closed and tried to convince myself I was seeing things, that maybe I was still half asleep. But the humming grew louder, and I could feel a vibration through the ground beneath me. Then came the whispers, not in English, not in any language I've ever heard. Multiple voices seemingly circling my tent. I'd like to say I acted bravely, but the truth is, I curled up in my sleeping bag, eyes shut tight, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The whispers and the humming continued for what felt like hours. At some point, exhaustion must have overtaken fear, because the next thing I remember is waking up to silence. Dawn was breaking. The fog was gone, the forest looking normal again in the gray morning light. I packed up camp faster than I ever have before and started hiking in what I thought was the direction back to the trailhead. Without working electronics, I had to rely on the sun and my paper map. But nothing matched up. Landmarks that should have been there weren't. The trail itself seemed to shift, sometimes clear and obvious, other times fading to nothing before reappearing in a completely different direction. I started marking trees with my knife to avoid going in circles, but twice I came across my own marks in places that should have been impossible. By midday, I knew I was in serious trouble. I was moving but getting nowhere. The forest had become a maze. I tried climbing to higher ground for a better view, but the topography made no sense compared to my map. It was like I was in a different mountain range altogether. That afternoon, I spotted something that gave me a surge of hope, a flash of color through the trees that looked like another hiker's gear. I shouted and ran toward it. There was a water bottle, my water bottle, the distinctive one with the university logo that had been in my pack. But I still had my water bottle. This one was just sitting there on a rock, like someone had placed it deliberately. I picked it up, and that's when I noticed the footprints. My footprints from my distinctive hiking boots, leading away from the spot in a direction I hadn't come from. I followed them, desperate for any clue, but they just stopped abruptly after about 20 yards, as if I had vanished into thin air. The sun was setting again, and I had no choice but to make another camp. This time, I chose an open area where I could see in all directions. I was running low on water and hadn't seen a stream all day, despite the fact that the area should have had plenty of water sources according to my map. That night, no strange lights or sounds came, just an oppressive silence and a growing sense of being watched. I didn't sleep at all. By morning, a fog had rolled in again, thicker than before. I packed up and started walking, using moss on trees and the dim glow of the sun through the fog to keep a consistent direction. Hours passed. The fog never lifted. My water was almost gone, and hunger was making me lightheaded. Then, through the mist, I saw something that stopped me cold, a search and rescue team. They were maybe 50 yards away, moving slowly through the trees, calling my name. I screamed until my throat was raw. I ran toward them, waving my arms frantically. They didn't react. It was like they couldn't see or hear me at all. I got within 10 feet of one searcher, close enough to see the patch on his jacket, to read the name tag. He looked right through me and continued calling my name. I tried touching him, but my hand... I still don't know how to explain this. My hand couldn't make contact, like there was an invisible barrier between us. They were right there, searching for me, and I was right there being searched for, and somehow we existed in different planes. I followed them for hours, screaming, trying everything to get their attention. Eventually they turned back, and I had no choice but to keep going on my own. Night fell again. The forest grew darker. My headlamp was dying, flickering weakly in the blackness. That's when I saw the lights, not the eerie blue glow from the first night, but warm yellow lights through the trees. A building? A road? I stumbled toward them, beyond caring about anything except escaping this nightmare. I broke through the tree line and found myself looking at Mowich Lake parking lot. My car was there, right where I'd left it. Park rangers were gathered around it, talking in hushed tones. Search team vehicles filled the lot. I stumbled toward them, relief washing over me. But no one turned. No one noticed me approaching. I tried to call out, but my voice made no sound, and when I looked down at myself in the harsh glare of their flashlights, I could see the parking lot asphalt through my own body. That was 3 weeks ago. I've been trying to make contact ever since. I can see my sister creating petitions to continue the search. I can see the rescue teams coming and going. I can see my face on missing person flyers, but I can't reach any of them. Sometimes I see the fog rolling in, and with it those tall figures moving just at the edge of my vision. Sometimes I hear the humming. I don't know what happened to me on that trail. I don't know if I'm dead or lost in some kind of limbo. All I know is I'm still here somehow, watching my own disappearance unfold like a spectator. If someone finds this, If somehow these words can cross whatever boundary separates me from the world I knew, please tell my family I'm still here. Tell them I'm trying to find my way back. And whatever you do, stay away from the Mother Mountain Loop when the fog comes in. Story 6. I was only 7 years old when it happened, but some memories burn themselves into your brain so deeply that time doesn't fade them at all. It's been 23 years, and I still can't hear a porch swing creak without feeling my heart jump into my throat. It was Halloween night in Pinewood, the suburb where I grew up. Most kids my age were already in bed. Their sugar highs crashed after trick-or-treating. Not me, though. My parents were pretty relaxed about bedtime on weekends and holidays, and I'd managed to convince them to let me stay up later than usual to watch a special Halloween cartoon marathon. Mom and Dad had gone to bed around 10, leaving me alone in the living room with a blanket and the soft glow of the TV. Our house was one of those typical suburban homes with a nice front porch that wrapped halfway around. My dad had installed a wooden swing the summer before, and my mom had decorated it with cushions. During the day, it was my favorite spot to read or just swing back and forth while watching the neighborhood. But that night, it became something else entirely. It must have been around 10:30 when I first heard it. The house was quiet except for the TV, which I had turned down so I wouldn't wake my parents. At first I thought it was just part of the show I was watching, that slow, rhythmic creak, but during a commercial break, I realized the sound was still there. Creak, creak, creak. My stomach tightened. I knew that sound. It was our porch swing. The hinges needed oiling, and they made that exact noise whenever anyone sat on it. But who would be on our porch swing at 10:30 on Halloween night? I tried to ignore it, turning the volume up slightly on the TV, but the creaking continued, steady and persistent. Maybe it was just the wind, I told myself. But deep down, I knew the sound of the swing when someone was sitting on it versus when it was just moving in the breeze. This was someone sitting, rocking back and forth. I remember pulling my blanket up higher, trying to focus on the cartoon characters on the screen, but my eyes kept drifting toward the living room window. The curtains were drawn, but there was a small gap where they didn't quite meet in the middle. From where I sat on the couch, I couldn't see the porch, but knowing that someone might be out there made my skin prickle with goosebumps. The creaking stopped abruptly. Somehow that was worse than the sound itself. Now I didn't know where they were. Had they gotten up? Were they approaching the door? My imagination went wild, conjuring images of the Halloween monsters I'd seen in commercials for the scary movies I wasn't allowed to watch. I sat frozen on the couch for what felt like forever, but was probably only a minute or two. Then, driven by a mix of fear and curiosity that only a 7-year-old can muster, I decided I needed to look. I had to know if someone was really there, or if my imagination was just running away with me. Slowly, I slipped off the couch, still clutching my blanket around my shoulders like a cape. I tiptoed to the window, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The gap in the curtains was just wide enough for me to peer through without having to move them. What I saw will forever be burned into my memory. There was a woman sitting on our porch swing, not a teenager playing a prank, not a lost neighbor. A woman probably in her 50s with gray streaked hair that hung in tangled clumps around her face. She was wearing nothing but a white nightgown, and even in the dim porch light, I could see dark stains all over it. In her right hand, clutched tightly, was what looked like a large kitchen knife, the kind my mom used to cut up chicken. She wasn't swinging anymore. She was just sitting there, staring straight ahead at our front door. her eyes wide and unblinking. The knife rested on her lap, her fingers opening and closing around the handle in a weird, twitchy rhythm. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet. This wasn't a ghost or a monster from a movie. This was a real person, a real threat sitting just outside our house. I ran to my parents' bedroom, not caring anymore about making noise. I burst through their door, already sobbing. "Dad, Mom, there's a lady on the porch. She has a knife." My dad groaned and rolled over, squinting at me in the darkness. "Tommy, what are you talking about? You've been watching scary shows again, haven't you?" "No, she's real. She's sitting on the swing and she has blood all over her nightgown and she has a knife." I was practically hyperventilating by this point. Mom sat up, looking concerned. "Honey, did you have a bad dream?" "I wasn't sleeping. I was watching TV and I heard the swing creaking and I looked, and she's there." Dad sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Tommy, it's Halloween. Your imagination is just... She's real," I screamed, tugging at his arm desperately. "Please, just come look." Dad looked at Mom, who gave him a nod. "All right, buddy, let's go check it out. But I bet it's just the wind moving the swing." He shuffled out of bed, pulling on his robe. I clung to his hand as we walked down the hallway. I could tell he didn't believe me. He had that patient but dismissive expression parents get when humoring their kids. But I knew what I'd seen. "Stay here," Dad said when we reached the living room, motioning for me to wait by the couch. He walked to the window first, peering through the same gap in the curtains I had used. I'll never forget how his body stiffened, how quickly his demeanor changed from sleepy disbelief to alert panic. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, immediately backing away from the window. "Cindy," he called to my mom, trying to keep his voice steady but urgent. "Call the police, now." Mom appeared in the hallway, her face confused. "What is it?" "Call the police," Dad repeated, his voice dead serious. "Tommy's right. There's someone on the porch." While Mom rushed to the phone in their bedroom, Dad moved quickly to the front door, checking that it was locked. Then he went to the cabinet where he kept his shotgun. I'd never seen him take it out before except for cleaning it. "Tommy, go to your room and stay there until I come get you," he ordered. But I was frozen in place, terrified of being alone. Before I could move, there was a soft knock at the door. 3 gentle taps that seemed to echo through the whole house. Dad motioned desperately for me to get back, raising the shotgun to his shoulder. I scrambled behind the couch, peeking over the top. "Who's there?" Dad called out, his voice much steadier than I expected. No answer came, just 3 more gentle knocks. Dad approached the door cautiously, positioning himself to the side of it. "I'm armed," he announced firmly. "The police are on their way. State your business." There was silence for a moment, and then a woman's voice, eerily calm. "I need to come in. It's cold out here." "Who are you?" Dad demanded. Another pause. "I live here," the voice replied, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Let me in, please. There's been an accident." Mom returned to the living room, whispering, "Police are on their way." 5 minutes. Her eyes were wide with fear as she looked at the door. Dad nodded, keeping his focus on the door. "Ma'am, this is private property. You need to leave now." The knocking became more insistent. "Let me in!" The calm voice was rising now, taking on a frantic edge. "I need to come in!" Dad motioned for Mom to take me away, but before she could reach me, there was a sudden crash. The woman had slammed herself against the door. The whole frame shuddered. Mom ran to me then, pulling me against her as we backed toward the hallway. Dad remained by the door, shotgun ready. The woman slammed against the door again, and I could hear her breathing heavily through the wood. "Let me in. Somebody killed my husband, but it wasn't me. It wasn't me." Her words sent ice through my veins. Mom's arms tightened around me, and I buried my face in her nightgown. "The police are almost here," Dad called out. "Step away from the door." There was a rattling sound. She was trying the doorknob. I peeked out from Mom's embrace to see Dad adjusting his grip on the shotgun, his knuckles white. Suddenly the rattling stopped. There was a moment of complete silence, so absolute it seemed to press against my eardrums. Then came the sound of rapid footsteps across the porch, followed by the creak of the steps. Dad rushed to the window, carefully pulling the curtain aside just enough to look out. "She's running across the yard," he reported tensely. Mom kept holding me, stroking my hair and whispering that everything would be okay, but I could feel her trembling. Dad moved from window to window, tracking the woman's movements. "She's going to the Andersons' place," he said, his voice tight with alarm. He rushed back to the door, hesitating with his hand on the lock. "Don't you dare go out there," Mom hissed. Dad shook his head. "I'm not, but I need to see if she gets in. The Andersons have kids too." The wail of police sirens cut through the night, just as Dad reported that the woman was trying to force open the Andersons' back door. Within minutes, our street was bathed in red and blue flashing lights. 2 police cars pulled up, and officers swarmed toward our house, and then, at Dad's direction, toward the Andersons. We watched from our window as they apprehended the woman in the Andersons' backyard. Even from a distance, I could see her struggling, her nightgown glowing white under the harsh police lights, the dark stains standing out starkly. An officer came to take our statement, while others secured the woman in a police car. Dad explained what had happened, his arm around my shoulders as he told them how I'd first noticed her. "You're a brave kid," the officer told me, but I didn't feel brave. I felt like my insides had turned to water. Later, after things had calmed down and the police had left, my parents sat me down to explain what they'd been told. The woman was mentally ill and had stopped taking her medication. She had attacked her husband with a knife, but hadn't managed to seriously hurt him. He had locked her out of their house, and somehow in her confused state, she'd ended up on our street. The blood on her nightgown was apparently her own. She had cut herself, either in an attempt at self-harm or to try to frame her husband for attacking her. The police weren't entirely sure. What they did know was that she needed help, and she was being taken to a hospital where she would get it. But explanations didn't help me sleep that night, or many nights after. For months, I refused to be in the living room after dark. The creaking of the porch swing would send me into a panic. Even now, as an adult living in my own home hundreds of miles from Pinewood, I can't have a porch swing. I keep my doors double locked at night, and I still sometimes wake up in a cold sweat, thinking I hear those 3 gentle knocks. Halloween has never been the same for me either. While other kids were afraid of ghosts and zombies, I learned that night that real people can be far more terrifying than any monster from a movie. That's the kind of fear that doesn't go away when you grow up and stop believing in the boogeyman. It stays with you, creaking softly in the back of your mind, like a porch swing moving in the dark. Story 7. I still can't drive past that house. Even now, 23 years later, I take the long way around, adding 15 minutes to my commute just to avoid Maple Street. My therapist says I need to confront my fears, but she doesn't understand. She wasn't there. She didn't see what we saw. Growing up in Ridgemont was mostly idyllic. It's your typical small town where everyone knows everyone's business, where the big excitement is the annual fall festival, and where kids could play outside until the streetlights came on. My grandparents lived in a cute little ranch house on the corner of Maple and Elm, and we'd visit them almost every weekend. That house was 3 doors down from my grandparents'. We called her the Chain Lady, not to her face, of course. We never got close. Enough for that. She stood well over 6 feet tall, impossibly thin, with wiry gray hair that stuck out in all directions like she'd been electrocuted. She always wore these long, faded floral dresses, no matter the weather, paired with men's logging boots. The chains around her neck were what gave her the nickname. Heavy-duty logging chains that rattled when she walked. My mom said she'd been wearing them for as long as anyone could remember. Every time we drove past, she'd be outside, meticulously cleaning her house. Not just sweeping the porch like a normal person. I'm talking scrubbing the siding with a toothbrush, polishing window frames with small cloths, or inspecting every inch of her fence with a magnifying glass. Her garden was immaculate. Raised beds filled with vegetables and flowers, all perfectly aligned, without a weed in sight. The adults in town avoided talking about her. Whenever we'd ask, they'd just say, "That's Ms. Holloway. Best to leave her be." But kids talk, and we'd heard plenty. Tommy Wilkins swore she ate cats. Jenny Palmer said her older brother saw Ms. Holloway digging in her yard at 3 in the morning during a thunderstorm. My cousin Becca claimed she once saw her drinking something dark red from a mason jar. The worst was when she'd notice us watching. She'd stop whatever she was doing, stand perfectly straight, and point a bony finger at us. "The devil is coming for you," she'd scream. "He's going to take your souls and gnaw on your bones." Then she'd cackle, this high-pitched sound that made my skin crawl, before returning to her cleaning like nothing had happened. My parents told me to ignore her, that she was troubled and harmless, but they always hurried us past her house and never let us play on that side of the street. I was 11 that Halloween. Me, my brother Jake, who was 9, and our cousins Becca, 12, Tyler, 10, and the twins Macy and Lucy, both 8, were staying with our grandparents while our parents went to some adult Halloween party in the next town over. After trick-or-treating, we were hanging out in Grandpa's garage, sorting through our candy hauls, when Tyler brought it up. I dare someone to knock on the Chain Lady's door. We all stopped and stared at him. "No way," Jake said. "Mom says she's dangerous." "Mom says she's troubled," I corrected him. "But yeah, no way." "Double dare," Tyler said, grinning. "Triple dog dare." "You can't triple dog dare if nobody accepted the first dare," Becca pointed out. She was always the logical one. "Fine," Tyler said. "I'll do it myself." "You're not going alone," I said, feeling suddenly protective. "If you're doing this stupid thing, we're all going." I don't know why I said that. Maybe I thought we'd talk him out of it once we got closer. Maybe I was curious too, or maybe I just didn't want to seem scared in front of my cousins. Whatever the reason, 20 minutes later, we were standing at the end of Ms. Holloway's driveway, the porch light casting weird shadows across her immaculate yard. It was just past 9 o'clock. The neighborhood was quiet, most trick-or-treaters already home, counting their candy. Miss Holloway's house was dark except for that single porch light and what looked like candlelight flickering in a back window. "I changed my mind," Tyler whispered. "This is stupid." "Too late," Becca said, pushing him forward. "It was your idea." We crept up the driveway, our costumes rustling. I was dressed as a zombie, Jake was a pirate, Becca was a witch, Tyler was a vampire, and the twins were matching ghosts, just sheets with eye holes cut out. I remember thinking how ironic it was that we were dressed as monsters while approaching the house of what might be a real one. Her yard was even creepier up close. The garden beds were perfectly rectangular, the soil dark and rich. There were no Halloween decorations, not even a pumpkin. The porch stairs creaked as we climbed them, and I swear the temperature dropped 10 degrees. We stood in front of her door, frozen. "Do it," Becca hissed at Tyler. Tyler's hand shook as he reached for the doorbell, but before he could press it, we heard something from inside. A thud, followed by a scraping sound, like something heavy being dragged. Tyler's hand dropped. "Let's go," he whispered. "No way," Becca said. "We came all this way." She stepped forward and knocked 3 times, loud and clear. The scraping sound stopped immediately. Complete silence followed. Then, bang, 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 something slammed against the door from the inside, making us all jump back. Bang, bang, bang. It came again, harder this time. The twins started crying. Jake grabbed my hand. Then the doorknob turned slowly and the door swung open. Ms. Holloway stood there, illuminated from behind by candlelight. She was even taller up close, her chains gleaming in the dim light. In her right hand, she held something by the hair, a head, a human head. The face was gray and waxy, the eyes half open, the mouth frozen in a scream. Blood dripped from the ragged neck, landing with soft plops on Ms. Holloway's clean porch. No one screamed. No one moved. It was like time stopped. Then Ms. Holloway smiled, revealing blackened teeth, and said in a voice like gravel, "Trick or treat, little devils." That broke the spell. We ran. All 6 of us, tearing down the driveway, candy bags forgotten, costumes flapping. Behind us, Ms. Holloway's laughter echoed, growing louder and more manic. We didn't stop running until we reached our grandparents' house, bursting through the door, talking over each other, trying to explain what we'd seen. Grandpa called the police while Grandma made us hot chocolate, trying to calm us down. When the officers arrived, they listened to our story, exchanged looks, and said they'd check it out. They came back an hour later, found nothing, they said. Ms. Holloway had been cooperative, letting them search her house. No heads, no blood, just an old woman who enjoyed scaring neighborhood kids on Halloween. The head was probably a Halloween prop, they said. The blood could have been corn syrup. They told our grandparents to keep us away from her house. "But we saw it," I insisted, tears streaming down my face. "It was real." "Halloween pranks," one officer said kindly. "Some adults take it too far." Nobody believed us. Not the police, not our grandparents, not even our parents when they picked us up the next morning. "Overactive imaginations," my dad said, ruffling my hair. "That old woman shouldn't scare kids like that, but you shouldn't have been on her property either." Life went back to normal. We still drove past Ms. Holloway's house on the way to our grandparents'. She was still there, cleaning, gardening, occasionally screaming about the devil. But now she'd smile when she saw us, a knowing smile that made my stomach turn. For a month, that's how things stayed. Until Thanksgiving. We were at my grandparents' again, the whole extended family crammed into their little house. My Aunt Lisa went out for a smoke around 8 p.m. She always had to hide it from Grandma, who didn't approve. 10 minutes later, we heard screaming from outside. Not normal screaming, the kind that freezes your blood. My Uncle Dave ran out first, followed by my dad and other uncles. I snuck out behind them. In the dim glow of the streetlight, I saw Aunt Lisa on the ground, clutching her neck, which was bleeding. Standing over her was Ms. Holloway, holding what looked like a thin wire with handles, a rope saw, the kind used for cutting small trees. "The devil sent me for you," Ms. Holloway was screaming. "Your family is marked." Uncle Dave tackled her, wrestling the saw from her hands. My dad helped Aunt Lisa, pressing his shirt against her neck to stop the bleeding. Someone was calling 911. I stood frozen, watching as Miss Holloway thrashed in Uncle Dave's grip, her chains clanking, her eyes wild. She looked right at me and smiled that terrible smile. "I almost had her head for my collection," she said conversationally, like she was discussing the weather. "Yours would look pretty too." The police came quickly this time. An ambulance took Aunt Lisa away. The cut wasn't as deep as it looked, but she needed stitches. Ms. Holloway was arrested, still screaming about devils and collections, as they put her in the police car. This time, they searched her house thoroughly. What they found made national news. Miss Holloway had been digging tunnels under the neighboring houses, including my grandparents'. The tunnels started in her basement and branched out like spider legs. She'd been disposing of the dirt in those raised garden beds. In a chamber 10 feet below her kitchen, they found a shrine, dozens of candles surrounding a crude altar made of stacked cinder blocks. On the walls, she'd written names, including all of ours, and surrounding the altar were heads. 7 of them, in various stages of decomposition, all displayed on wooden posts. The police identified 5 of them as missing persons from neighboring counties. The other 2 were never identified. They found journals, too, detailing her plans to cleanse the neighborhood of devils. My family was next on her list. She'd been watching us for years, planning, preparing. The tunnel to my grandparents' house was almost complete. I still have nightmares about what might have happened if we hadn't knocked on her door that Halloween night. Would she have come for us in our sleep? Would our heads be on those posts? Ms. Holloway is in a psychiatric facility now. The papers said she suffered from severe paranoid schizophrenia, exacerbated by decades of isolation. But that doesn't explain how she dug those tunnels alone, or how no one noticed the missing dirt, or how she subdued adult victims without anyone hearing. Sometimes I drive by the old neighborhood when visiting my parents. Ms. Holloway's house was torn down years ago, the lot's still empty. No one wants to build there. But sometimes when I glance over, I swear I can see her, standing tall in her dirty dress and logging boots, chains around her neck, smiling that terrible smile, pointing a bony finger at me. And on windy nights, I still hear her voice carried on the breeze. "The devil is coming for you." I still don't know if she was just insane or if she really was working for something darker. All I know is that what 6 kids saw on Halloween night was real, despite what the adults wanted to believe. And sometimes the monsters aren't hiding under your bed. They're living 3 doors down, tending their garden and waiting for their chance. Story 8. I still get chills thinking about what happened last Halloween. I'm a junior at Willow Creek University, and like most college students, I was looking forward to a fun night out with friends. It's been almost a year, but I can't stop replaying everything in my head, wondering what could have happened if I hadn't trusted my instincts. It was October 31st, and Emma, my roommate, had heard about this huge party at a house near the river. Willow Creek is one of those small college towns where everyone seems to know everyone, which usually makes me feel safe. I remember spending hours on my costume. I went as a vampire, with fake blood and all. Nothing too fancy, just enough to look festive without trying too hard. We arrived at the party around 9 in the evening. The house was already packed, music blasting so loud you could hear it from the street. Multicolored lights flashed through the windows, and people in all sorts of costumes crowded the front yard. It was exactly what you'd expect from a college Halloween party. Red cups everywhere, the smell of beer and cheap cologne mixing in the air, and that excited energy that comes with a night where everyone's pretending to be someone else. Emma and I squeezed our way inside immediately spotting some of our friends by the makeshift bar in the kitchen. I remember grabbing a drink and promising myself I'd only have two, max. I had a morning class the next day and didn't want to be completely wrecked. Around 10:30, the party was getting even more crowded. The living room had turned into a dance floor, and it was getting harder to move around without bumping into people. That's when I first noticed him. He was leaning against the wall near the hallway, watching everyone. Not dancing, not really talking to anyone, just observing. He wasn't in costume, just wearing jeans and a dark jacket. He must have been in his late 20s, maybe early 30s. Definitely older than most people at the party. He had this dark hair that fell slightly over his eyes, and when our gazes met, he didn't look away. He just stared with this slight smile that made my skin crawl. I turned to Emma and pointed him out. "Do you know that guy over there?" She looked over and immediately made a face. "Oh, him. Ashley says he's super creepy. He shows up at parties around campus sometimes, even though nobody knows who he is or who invites him. Just stay away from him." That was all the warning I needed. I made a mental note to avoid him and went back to enjoying the party. But as the night went on, I kept noticing him in my peripheral vision. Every time I looked, he seemed to be closer. By 11:15, I had lost track of Emma in the crowd. The house was absolutely packed now, and it was getting uncomfortably hot. I decided to step outside for some fresh air. The backyard was quieter, with just a few small groups of people chatting. The cool October air felt amazing after being stuffed inside with all those bodies. I was checking my phone, texting Emma to find out where she'd gone, when I felt someone approach me. "Great night for a party," said a deep voice. I looked up, and there he was, the creepy guy Emma had warned me about. Up close, he was even more unsettling. He had these intense eyes that never seemed to blink enough. My heart immediately started racing. "Yeah, it's okay," I replied, trying to sound casual while subtly looking around for a familiar face. "I haven't seen you at these parties before," he continued, taking a sip from his cup. "I'm Drew." "Natalie," I said, immediately regretting giving him my real name. "I should probably go find my friends." "They're all inside, probably too drunk to even notice you're gone," he said with a chuckle that contained zero humor. "Why don't we chat for a bit? It's so loud in there." I felt trapped. The backyard had emptied out even more, and I couldn't see anyone I knew. My phone buzzed. Emma had texted that she was upstairs with some other friends. "Actually, I'm supposed to be heading to my friend Jake's house soon," I lied, thinking quickly. Jake was a good friend who lived nearby, though I had no plans to go there. Drew's eyebrows raised. "Jake? Jake Wilson?" My stomach dropped. That was Jake's last name. How did this stranger know him? "Yeah," I said cautiously. "That's crazy. I just saw him earlier. He told me he was having some people over after this," Drew said, his face lighting up with what seemed like genuine surprise. "I'm actually heading there later too." I didn't believe him for a second, but I also didn't know how to politely extract myself from the conversation. "Oh, cool. Well, I should go find my other friends first. If you're heading to Jake's, I can give you the address. It's not far," he offered. "Actually, I can walk with you. I was just about to leave anyway." "No," I said too quickly. "I mean, no thanks. I'm not leaving yet, and I already know where Jake lives." He pulled out his phone. "Do you? Because he just moved last week. Here, let me show you." He showed me his phone screen with an address typed in. The street name was familiar. It was in the neighborhood near campus where a lot of students lived. Oh, I didn't know he moved I said, trying to play along while planning my escape. 235 Oakwood Street, he said. It's about 15 minutes from here walking. I'd offer you a ride, but I walked here myself. Thanks, but I'm going to stay a bit longer, I insisted, spotting a group of people I vaguely recognized from one of my classes. I see some friends, so I should go say hi. I practically ran away from him, pushing my way back into the house. The crush of people inside now felt like safety rather than discomfort. I spent the next half hour frantically looking for Emma or any of my close friends, but the party had grown to the point where it was nearly impossible to find anyone. By midnight, I was frustrated and tired. I'd texted Emma, Jake, and several other friends, but with the noise and chaos, no one was responding quickly. I decided I'd had enough and would just go home. But as I was heading toward the front door, I saw Drew again, watching me from across the room. I panicked. I didn't want him following me home. Without really thinking it through, I changed direction and slipped out the back door instead. Once outside, I made a split-second decision that I still regret. I would go to the address he'd shown me. Not because I believed Jake was there, but because it was in a neighborhood I knew was populated mainly by students. I figured I could knock on a random door if I needed help, or at least be around people if Drew followed me. It was a cool, clear night as I started walking. The streets were still lively with costumed partygoers moving between houses. I kept checking over my shoulder, but didn't see Drew following me. After about 10 minutes, the crowds thinned out as I moved away from the main party areas near campus. The neighborhood began to change subtly. The houses looked older, less maintained. Fewer lights were on. Fewer people were around. By the time I realized I was heading into one of the more run-down areas of Willow Creek, I was already several blocks in. I checked the address again, 235 Oakwood Street. According to my phone's GPS, I was almost there. I told myself that if it didn't look right, I would immediately call an Uber and leave. When I reached the address, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October night. The house was dark, except for a faint light visible through closed curtains in one window. The yard was unkempt, with overgrown bushes and what looked like garbage bags piled near the side. This was definitely not a place where Jake or any of my friends would live. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, suddenly aware of how stupid I'd been. Of course, Jake hadn't moved here. This whole thing had been some kind of sick game. Just as I turned to leave, the porch light flickered on. The front door creaked open a few inches. My breath caught in my throat as I saw a figure standing in the doorway. Not Drew, but someone else. Someone wearing all black with what looked like a ski mask covering their face. Before I could process what was happening, the door opened wider, and I saw Drew step out from behind the masked figure. Even from the sidewalk, I could see his smile in the dim porch light. "Natalie, you made it," he called out, his voice sounding eerily cheerful. "Come on in. This isn't Jake's place, it's mine. I just wanted us to have somewhere quiet to talk." Time seemed to slow down. I stood there for what felt like minutes but was probably only seconds, my brain struggling to process the situation. Two men, a dark, isolated house, a lie to get me here. "No thanks," I finally managed to say, my voice barely audible. "I just remembered I need to be somewhere else." Drew's face changed then, the fake friendliness dropping away. "You're already here. Don't be rude. Come inside." He started walking down the porch steps toward me, while the masked figure remained in the doorway. Something primal took over. I didn't think, I just ran. I bolted across the street and between two houses, hearing Drew shout behind me. I was wearing these stupid heeled boots that were part of my costume, but fear gave me speed I didn't know I possessed. I could hear footsteps behind me, getting closer. I cut through a backyard, tripping on something and nearly falling, but somehow managing to stay upright. A dog started barking somewhere nearby. I kept running, zigzagging through yards, jumping over low fences, my lungs burning and my heart threatening to explode. I have no idea how long I ran or how many blocks I covered. At some point, I realized I couldn't hear anyone behind me anymore. I found myself in a more populated area where a small group of people were standing outside another party. I rushed up to them, probably looking like a complete mess, and asked to use someone's phone since mine had died. A lie. I was just too panicked to dig mine out. I called Jake, the real Jake, and between gasps for air explained where I was. He and 2 other friends came to get me within 15 minutes. When they arrived, Jake wanted to go back to the house I described or call the police, but I was too scared. What if those men were gone? What if the police didn't believe me? Nothing had actually happened after all. I'd just been scared. Looking back, I know I should have reported it. Who knows how many other women that man has targeted, or what might have happened if I hadn't trusted my instincts and run away. I never saw Drew again after that night, but I still get paranoid at parties. I double-check addresses. I never walk anywhere alone at night, and I always make sure my friends know exactly where I am. Sometimes I look over my shoulder, half expecting to see him watching me from a distance with that same cold smile. That night changed how I see the world. I realized how easily I could have become a statistic, another missing person poster that people walk past without really seeing. I'm sharing this now as a warning. Trust your gut. Stay aware of your surroundings, and remember that sometimes the scariest monsters aren't wearing Halloween costumes. Story 9. I never thought I'd be writing about this, but I need to get it off my chest. I'm still trying to make sense of what happened in that apartment building I manage in San Francisco back in '89. I've been a landlord for over 20 years. You see all kinds of tenants in this business, the good, the bad, the weird, but nothing prepared me for James. He showed up to view the 1-bedroom apartment on the 2nd floor on a foggy April morning. Skinny guy, mid-20s, with these intense eyes that darted around nervously. He had this way of standing, always shifting his weight from one foot to the other like he couldn't stay still. When he talked about his chemistry graduate program at the university, though, he'd get all animated. I remember thinking he seemed harmless enough, just another academic type. His paperwork checked out. Good credit score, solid references from previous landlords, and he even paid the security deposit in cash right then and there. Who was I to turn down a responsible tenant? I handed him the keys that afternoon. For the first few months, everything was perfect. James was quiet, kept to himself, paid his rent on time, even early sometimes, the kind of tenant landlords dream about. I only ever saw him in passing, usually carrying grocery bags or those heavy-looking backpacks students lug around. Then around August, Maria from the apartment above his started calling. Maria was in her 60s, lived alone with her cat, and had been in the building for over a decade. Not the type to complain without reason. "Frank," she said during that first call, "there's something strange going on downstairs. Some kind of chemical smell. It's making me dizzy." I promised to check it out and stopped by James's apartment that evening. No answer when I knocked, but I could smell it too. Something sharp and medicinal that burned my nostrils. I left a note asking him to call me. He called the next day, apologizing profusely. said he was working on a school project, nothing dangerous, and promised to be more careful with ventilation. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? Graduate students do all sorts of weird stuff for their research. The calls from Maria stopped for a while. Then, about 3 weeks later, she called again, more insistent this time. The smell was back, stronger than before, and she swore she could hear strange noises too. Bubbling sounds, glass clinking, sometimes what sounded like muttering at all hours. This time when I went over, I used my master key after knocking 3 times with no response. The lease allowed for emergency entry, and with the chemical smell now seeping into the hallway, I felt justified. I wish I hadn't gone in. The living room looked normal enough. Sparse furniture, books stacked on shelves, a laptop on the coffee table. But the kitchen, God, the kitchen. He'd transformed it into some kind of laboratory. Every inch of counter space was covered with equipment. Beakers filled with colored liquids, test tubes in racks, Bunsen burners, and unlabeled bottles of chemicals. Some kind of ventilation setup with flexible tubing was rigged to the window, but it clearly wasn't working well. I was standing there, mouth open, when James walked in from the bathroom. He froze when he saw me. "What are you doing in here?" he asked, his voice eerily calm despite the obvious intrusion. "Emergency inspection," I said, gesturing to the makeshift lab. "What the hell is all this, James?" He started explaining, talking faster than I could follow, something about molecular reconfiguration and practical applications of his thesis research. He insisted none of it was illegal, that he wasn't cooking drugs or making bombs, just research that his department didn't have space for. "The university has labs for this exact purpose," I told him. "They don't understand what I'm doing," he said, rubbing his hands together nervously. "They'd shut it down if they knew. This is important work, Mr. Winters. Revolutionary." I didn't care how revolutionary it was. This was a clear violation of the lease. I told him he had 1 week to remove all the equipment or I'd start eviction proceedings. He nodded, apologized again, promised to clean it up. The look in his eyes, though, it wasn't resignation. It was something else. Determination, maybe, or desperation. I left feeling uneasy, but thought I'd handled it. 1 week wasn't unreasonable. I even called Maria to let her know the situation was being addressed. 6 days later, just 1 day before my deadline, Maria called me at 2 in the afternoon, hysterical. "Frank, you need to come now." She was crying, her voice shaking. "The smell is worse than ever, and James is screaming. I think he's hurt. I already called 911. I drove over immediately, my heart pounding in my chest. By the time I arrived, the street was blocked with police cars, an ambulance, and even a fire truck. People from neighboring buildings were standing around watching. I tried to push my way through, telling them I was the landlord, but a police officer stopped me. "Sir, you can't go in there right now," he said, firm but not unkind. "What happened? Is everyone okay?" He didn't answer directly. "We'll need to speak with you later about the tenant. For now, please stay back." I stood there for hours, watching paramedics go in and out, police taking statements from neighbors. Maria was sitting in an ambulance, oxygen mask on her face. Chemical exposure, I later learned. I caught glimpses of hazmat suits entering the building. It was almost 8 o'clock that evening when my phone rang. A detective identifying himself as Rodriguez wanted to meet me at the building. When I arrived, the emergency vehicles were gone, replaced by a single police car and a van with some kind of government logo I didn't recognize. Detective Rodriguez was a short man with deep creases around his eyes. "Mr. Winters, I'm sorry to inform you that your tenant, James Caldwell, is deceased." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What happened?" "We're still investigating." but it appears to be an accident involving chemicals he was working with. We'll need access to any paperwork you have on him. Lease, rental application, anything that might help us contact next of kin. I nodded, numb. When can I access the apartment? I need to assess the damage. The scene is still being processed. We'll let you know. It was nearly 2 weeks before I was allowed back in. 2 weeks of fielding calls from worried tenants, arranging temporary housing for Maria, whose apartment had been deemed unsafe due to chemical residue, and dealing with insurance companies who were less than thrilled about covering damage from an unauthorized chemistry lab. When I finally walked into James's apartment, I expected destruction. Burn marks, melted equipment, the aftermath of whatever catastrophic experiment had killed him. Instead, I found nothing. The apartment was stripped bare. No lab equipment, no chemicals, no personal belongings. Just empty rooms with the faint, lingering smell of something acrid. The only evidence of what had happened was in the bathroom. The old cast-iron bathtub, the kind with the white enamel coating that you find in older buildings, had a human-shaped burn mark etched deeply into it. Not a stain you could scrub away, but an actual etching, as if something had eaten through the enamel to reveal the dark metal beneath. The silhouette was unmistakably human. Arms, legs, the curve of a head. But there were no scorch marks anywhere else. No ash, no sign of fire at all. I ran my fingers over the edge of the silhouette, feeling where the smooth enamel transitioned to rough, exposed metal. It was cold to the touch, but something about it made my skin crawl. The official investigation concluded within a month. James had been warned about lab safety at his university, but continued dangerous experiments at home. When something went wrong, he apparently jumped into the bathtub to extinguish the flames, but couldn't save himself. Case closed. Accidental death. But that explanation never sat right with me. Where was the other evidence of fire? Why was the burn mark so perfectly shaped? And why did the government take everything from the apartment? I had to replace that bathtub. Cost me a fortune. No amount of cleaning could remove the stain, and I couldn't exactly rent the place out with a human silhouette etched into the tub. But even after the renovation, tenants never stayed long in that unit. They'd move in, then be gone within months, all complaining about the same thing, a persistent chemical smell that would come and go, strongest at night. I tried everything. New ventilation, air purifiers, even had a hazmat team do a deep clean once. Nothing worked. About a year after James died, I tracked down one of his classmates from the university, a nervous guy named Patrick, who kept looking over his shoulder the entire time we talked in a campus coffee shop. James was brilliant, Patrick told me, voice low. But he was obsessed with this idea of rewriting matter, breaking down and rebuilding the fundamental building blocks of life. The department cut his funding when they realized where his research was heading. Where was it heading? I asked. Patrick glanced around again. He believed he could dissolve organic matter completely, break it down to its molecular components, and then reconstruct it, restructure it, change what it was fundamentally. Like alchemy? More advanced. He talked about the body as a vessel, about transferring consciousness. Weird stuff. I thought it was just talk until he started showing up with burns on his hands. Chemical burns. He'd laugh about them, call them progress markers. I thought about the bathtub, that perfect human silhouette. Did he ever succeed at any of this? Patrick shrugged. I don't know. We stopped talking when he got weirder. Started talking about experimenting on himself. He paused, took a sip of his coffee. You know what's strange, though? The day before he died, he called me. first time in months. Said he'd had a breakthrough, that he'd figured out how to slip through. Those were his exact words. I can slip through now, Patrick. I can go and come back. I never rented that apartment for more than 6 months at a stretch after that. One tenant swore he heard bubbling sounds from the walls at night. Another claimed she saw a silhouette moving in the bathroom mirror when she turned off the lights, a silhouette that didn't match her own. I'm retired now, past the building management to my daughter, but I made sure to add a special clause to the rental agreements prohibiting the use of volatile chemicals in the apartments. When potential tenants ask about this unusual stipulation, I just say it's standard policy. But I remember that bathtub, that perfect, impossible burn mark. And sometimes, when I'm falling asleep, I think about James's last words to his classmate. I can slip through now. I can go and come back. I wonder where he went, and I wonder if he ever came back. Story 10. I've never really told this story to anyone outside my family. It's been 15 years, but sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night thinking about what might have happened if I'd made different choices that day. It was late September, I remember, because the leaves were just starting to change. I was 12 years old, bored out of my mind at my brother's soccer game. My mom had dragged me along because she didn't want me home alone, while she and my dad watched my 14-year-old brother play. It was some kind of regional tournament at Westridge Park, which meant the games would go on all day. If you've ever been to a youth soccer tournament, you know how mind-numbing they can be when you're not the one playing. I'd already gone through 2 comic books, eaten all my snacks, and my Game Boy's batteries had died about an hour in. My parents were completely absorbed in the game. My brother was pretty good, and they never missed a moment. "Mom, I'm just gonna walk around for a bit," I said. She barely looked at me, just nodded and said, "Stay where I can see you, Daniel." But she wasn't really paying attention. My dad was yelling something about offsides. I wandered away from the bleachers, kicking at rocks and watching other games happening on the nearby fields. Eventually, I drifted toward the edge of the park, where it backed up to some woods. There was this old, abandoned hockey rink, just a concrete slab with weathered boards around it and rusty metal goals at each end. During winter, they'd sometimes flood it for ice skating, but in September, it was just a forgotten corner of the park. I had a tennis ball in my pocket that I'd found earlier, so I started throwing it against the boards of the rink, pretending I was a pitcher. The hollow thwack of the ball hitting the wood was satisfying, and I got into a rhythm. Throw, catch, throw, catch. I don't know how long I was there, maybe 15 minutes, when I heard a voice behind me. "Nice arm you got there, kid." I turned around to see a man standing at the edge of the trees. He wasn't particularly tall, but he seemed big somehow. He wore a faded blue baseball cap pulled low over his eyes and had this scruffy beard that was starting to gray. His jacket was too heavy for the weather, one of those canvas work jackets with the flannel lining. I remember thinking it was weird because I was comfortable in just a t-shirt. "Thanks," I mumbled, suddenly aware that I was pretty far from the soccer fields. Not so far that I couldn't see people, but far, enough that they weren't paying attention to me. "You play baseball?" he asked, taking a few steps closer. He had his hands in his pockets and was smiling, but something about the smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yeah, Little League," I said, bouncing the tennis ball nervously in my hand. "Thought so. I can tell by how you throw." He was closer now, maybe 15 feet away. "I used to coach, you know. Travel teams, high school, that sort of thing." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded and threw the ball against the boards again. It bounced back wildly, and I had to lunge to catch it. "Good hands, too," he said, nodding approvingly. "You know, it's funny I ran into you. I was just cleaning out my truck and found this really nice baseball glove. Leather, barely used, pro model." My interest perked up despite myself. My own glove was falling apart, and my parents had said I needed to earn a new one. "Really?" I asked. "Yeah, it's just sitting in my truck. I was going to donate it somewhere, but if you'd use it, you can have it. No point in it going to waste." Something in my stomach tightened a little. My parents had always warned me about strangers offering things. But this guy said he was a coach, and he was talking about baseball like he knew what he was doing. "That's okay," I said, starting to back up a little. "I should probably get back to my brother's game." "It'll just take a minute," he insisted, his voice changing slightly, less friendly, more urgent. "My truck's right over there." He pointed toward a small parking area on the other side of the woods. "You can see it from here." I couldn't actually see any truck from where we were standing. "I have to ask my parents first," I said, clutching the tennis ball tighter. His face changed then, just for a second, before he forced that smile back. Sure, I get it. But it'll just take a minute, and then you can surprise them with the new glove. Come on." I parked right around the path. Looking back now, I should have just turned and sprinted back to the fields. But when you're 12, you're caught in this weird space where you're trying to be more independent, but you still don't fully trust your instincts. And adults still have this authority that's hard to question. So when he started walking along the tree line, gesturing for me to follow, I hesitated but then went along, staying several feet behind him. I figured I could always run if I needed to. We walked along the edge of the woods, not going in too deep, which made me feel a little better. I could still hear the distant cheers from the soccer games. After a minute or two, we came to a small gravel lot where a few cars were parked. Most were empty, probably belonging to people watching the games, but near the back was an old pickup truck. It was this faded red color with spots of primer showing through. The bumper was hanging crooked, and one of the taillights was broken. "There she is," he said, walking toward the truck. "Nothing pretty, but she gets me where I need to go." I stopped about 10 feet away, suddenly very aware of how isolated this spot was. The trees blocked the view of the soccer fields, and no one else was around. "The glove's inside," he said, opening the driver's side door. The interior was a mess: fast food wrappers, empty coffee cups, and what looked like old clothes piled on the passenger seat. "It's stuck behind the back seat. Why don't you hop in and grab it? My back's been killing me lately." I didn't move. "I can't reach it from here," he said, his voice hardening just a little. "Just climb in for a second." My heart was pounding as I took a reluctant step forward. Something was very wrong here. I peered into the truck from a distance, trying to see this supposed baseball glove. There was nothing that looked like baseball equipment anywhere. "I don't see any glove," I said, my voice cracking a little. "It's there. Just climb in and look behind the seat," he insisted, moving to position himself between me and the truck door. I noticed he was now blocking the most direct path back to the fields. I leaned forward slightly, pretending to look, while trying to figure out what to do. The cab of the truck smelled like cigarettes and something sour. As I bent forward, I felt him move directly behind me, close enough that I could feel his presence. "See it yet?" he asked, his voice right by my ear now. My stomach dropped. This was bad, really bad. "I should go," I said, trying to step back, but he put his hands on my shoulders. Heavy hands, strong hands. "Just get in the truck, kid," he said, all pretense gone from his voice. "Now." In that moment, my body reacted before my brain could even process what was happening. I spun around and kicked him as hard as I could right in the shin. I'd like to say I aimed there, but honestly, it was just the part of him I could reach. He let out a yelp of pain and his grip loosened just enough. I ducked under his arm and ran. I ran faster than I'd ever run in my life. I didn't look back. I didn't stop. I just sprinted along the path we'd taken, bursting out of the tree line and across the open field toward the soccer games. My lungs were burning, and I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. I don't know if he chased me. Maybe my speed surprised him, or maybe he knew he couldn't grab me with so many people around. All I know is that I didn't slow down until I reached my parents. "Daniel, what's wrong?" My mom jumped up when she saw me, red-faced and gasping for breath. Between gulps of air, I told them what happened. My dad's face turned a shade of red I'd never seen before. He immediately ran toward the parking lot while my mom grabbed me in a tight hug and called 911 on her cell phone. By the time the police arrived, the red truck was gone. My dad said he'd searched the entire parking area and the surrounding streets, but couldn't find it. The police took my statement and searched the woods, but there was nothing to find. They asked me a lot of questions: what the man looked like, what he was wearing, what kind of truck it was. I told them everything I could remember, but it all seemed fuzzy already, like my brain was trying to protect me by blurring the details. For weeks afterward, police cars patrolled the park. They showed me mugshots, but I never saw his face among them. They checked with other parks and schools in the area to see if anyone matching his description had been spotted, but nothing ever came of it. My parents didn't let me go anywhere alone for months. My brother became my constant shadow at school. Everyone was on high alert, but they never found him. Sometimes I wonder if he moved on to another town, another park, another kid. That thought keeps me up at night more than any other. I'm 27 now, and I still get nervous when I see a beat-up red truck. I still don't like walking near wooded areas by myself. And I've never been able to enjoy throwing a ball against a wall again. The police told my parents that I did everything right, that my instincts probably saved my life. But I still think about what would have happened if I'd gotten in that truck, if I'd been just a little more trusting, a little less aware. I know how lucky I am. I know not every kid who encounters someone like that gets to run home and tell the story. Sometimes I'll read news stories about missing children, and I'll feel this cold sickness in my stomach, knowing how close I came to being one of those statistics. Just a school photo on a flyer, a desperate plea from my parents on the local news. I've never been able to explain to anyone exactly what it felt like in that moment when his hands gripped my shoulders. The absolute certainty that if I got in that truck, I would never see my family again. It's a feeling I wouldn't wish on anyone, especially not a 12-year-old kid who just wanted to cure his boredom at a soccer game. To this day, I don't know what his real intentions were. I don't want to know. All I know is that on an ordinary September afternoon in a park full of people, I came face to face with something evil, and somehow I got away. Story 11. I've never shared this with anyone outside my therapist. I'm only writing this now because I need to feel like I'm not crazy, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar. I don't expect solutions. I just need to know I'm not alone. This happened 3 months ago. I'd been hiking sections of the Appalachian Trail in North Georgia for years. I know those woods like the back of my hand, or at least I thought I did. There's this old-timer Everett who lives in a cabin about 4 miles off one of the less-traveled spurs. Local hikers know him. He's harmless, just prefers solitude. I'd stop by occasionally to check on him, bring him supplies, that sort of thing. That day started normal enough. I'd hiked to Everett's place carrying some medications he needed. It was early October, perfect hiking weather, crisp air, leaves just starting to turn. I reached his cabin around noon, planning to head back before dusk. Something felt off the moment I arrived. Everett seemed jumpy, distracted. His cabin looked different too. The windows were covered with what looked like black garbage bags taped up, and I noticed bundles of dried sage hanging above every doorway. When I asked about it, he just muttered something about keeping things out. We sat on his porch while he sorted through the supplies I'd brought. He kept glancing at the tree line, like he was watching for something. That's when he started talking about it. "You heading back today?" he asked, his voice tighter than usual. I nodded, planning to make it back before dark. His face changed. "Listen to me carefully. The woods ain't right lately. I've heard plenty of Everett's superstitions before. The man's lived alone in these mountains for 30-some years, but something in his tone made me pay attention. If the woods go quiet on you, and I mean dead quiet, you stop walking. Don't talk, don't run, and whatever you do, don't turn around." His eyes were dead serious. "Something's been moving through these parts." I smiled, trying to lighten the mood. "Bears are active this time of year." "This ain't no bear." He stood up abruptly and went inside. When he returned, he pressed a small cloth pouch into my palm. It felt lumpy, maybe 2 inches square, tied with twine. "What's this?" I asked. "Salt, bones, a few teeth, stuff it doesn't like." His hand trembled slightly. "Keep it on you. Don't open it." I pocketed it to humor him, figuring he was having one of his episodes. Looking back, I wish I'd asked more questions. The hike back started fine. The main trail was about a mile from Everett's cabin, accessible by a narrow path that connected to it. I'd traveled this route dozens of times. The forest was alive with sound, birds calling, squirrels rustling through fallen leaves, the occasional snap of a branch from some larger animal moving in the distance. Normal forest sounds. I was maybe 2 miles in when I first noticed the change. It wasn't immediate, more like a gradual fading. The birdsong thinned out, then stopped entirely. The rustling in the underbrush ceased. Within minutes, the woods fell into an unnatural silence. I remembered Everett's warning and felt a ridiculous chill. I kept walking but slowed my pace, straining to hear anything. Wind in the trees, distant birds, anything. Nothing. Just the sound of my own breathing and footsteps on the trail. That's when I saw it. Not directly, just at the edge of my vision, standing between trees maybe 50 yards off trail. I didn't get a clear look, just an impression of something tall, too tall, with proportions that seemed wrong. Arms too long, legs bent like a deer's, but not quite. I snapped my head to look directly at it, but nothing was there. I quickened my pace, telling myself it was just my imagination triggered by Everett's warnings. The silence pressed in. I could hear my heartbeat now, thumping in my ears. The pouch in my pocket seemed to grow heavier. The sun was lower than it should have been. I checked my watch. 4:30. It didn't make sense. The hike back should only take 3 hours at most, and I'd left around noon. I'd been walking less than 2 hours, but the light had that golden-orange quality of late afternoon sliding toward evening. I remember thinking I should have passed the halfway marker by now, a distinctive lightning-struck oak that all the locals know. When I finally reached it, relief washed over me. Then I checked my GPS. According to my tracker, I'd only gone half a mile from Everett's cabin. That was impossible. I'd been walking steadily for nearly 2 hours. That's when I heard it. Singing. At least that's the closest word I have for it. A voice that sounded almost human, but held notes too long, with tones that seemed to slide between pitches in a way human voices can't. It came from behind me at first, then seemed to circle around. I stood frozen, remembering Everett's words. Don't run, don't turn around. The singing moved. It was in front of me now, then to my right, then behind me again. So close that I felt hot breath on the back of my neck. I clutched the pouch in my pocket and kept walking, eyes fixed on the trail ahead. The path should have been taking me out of the woods, toward the highway, but landmarks I recognized were appearing in the wrong order. Distinctive rocks, unusual trees, things I'd passed hours ago were showing up again. I was walking in circles, or the trail was changing somehow. The woods grew darker. The singing stopped, replaced by something worse, children laughing. Not playful laughter, but the kind that makes your skin crawl. It seemed to come from all directions at once. Then whispers, my name, right in my ear, as if someone was walking beside me. I didn't look. The worst part came when I heard my own voice. Not my thoughts, my actual voice speaking from somewhere in the trees. It was saying things I might say, but with the cadence slightly wrong, like someone learning a new language. Beautiful evening for a hike. I should be home soon, nothing to worry about here. By now, the sun was setting, casting long shadows that seemed to move independently of the trees that created them. I reached a clearing I recognized. I should have been nearly back to the trailhead. Instead, I saw the lightning-struck oak again. Somehow, impossibly, I was back at the halfway point. That's when I saw myself. Standing just off the trail was what looked exactly like me. Same clothes, same backpack, same face. But its smile was too wide, and when it shifted its weight, I could see its knees bent backward. It raised a hand in greeting, mirroring my exact posture. Everett's warnings dissolved. Pure animal panic took over. I ran. The trail disappeared beneath my feet. One moment I was on packed dirt, the next plunging through dense underbrush. Branches whipped my face. I tripped over roots and fell hard, scrambling back up with my hands covered in dirt and blood from a cut I don't remember getting. Night fell completely. I had a flashlight but was too terrified to stop and find it. The forest had transformed into something alien. Trees seemed to shift positions when I wasn't looking directly at them. The ground felt spongy, wrong. I ran until my lungs burned, then collapsed against what I thought was a tree trunk. When I finally caught my breath and looked up, I realized I was leaning against something else. Something tall and spindly with limbs too numerous to count. I raised my eyes higher and higher until I saw a face, if you could call it that, with glowing red where eye sockets should be, and a mouth that kept widening as I watched. I don't remember much after that. Somehow I found myself back on the trail, the real trail. I ran toward lights in the distance that turned out to be the highway. A trucker stopped for me. I must have looked insane, covered in dirt, scratches all over my face, babbling about things in the woods. He drove me to the nearest gas station, where I called a friend to pick me up. I've been back home for 3 months now. I moved from my cabin near the woods into an apartment in town. But it followed me here. It started small, humming coming from inside closets that stops when I open the doors. Handprints appearing on the bathroom mirror after hot showers. Handprints too large to be human. My own face watching me through windows from outside when I'm inside. Last week, I found something in my jacket pocket, a piece of flannel with Everett's name stitched into it. I never took anything from his cabin. I called the ranger station and asked about him. They found his cabin empty, no sign of where he'd gone. The windows were intact, not covered with black plastic. No sage bundles, nothing unusual at all. Sometimes now I hear singing outside my bedroom window at night. Notes held too long. I keep the pouch Everett gave me under my pillow, but I don't know if it helps. If you're hiking the Appalachian Trail in North Georgia, please be careful. If the woods go quiet and you hear singing, don't look into the trees. And if you see your own face looking back at you from between the branches, run. But know that it won't matter, because once it's seen your face, it will follow you home. Story 12. I've never written this down before. It's been about 11 months, and I still get a lump in my throat thinking about it. My hands are actually shaking a bit as I type this. It happened last December, the weekend after Thanksgiving. My wife Emily had taken our kids, Zach, 8, and Lily, 6, to visit her college roommate about 40 minutes away. They were doing some early Christmas shopping and having dinner, which gave me the perfect window to tackle the Christmas lights. It's always been my job since we moved to Oak Ridge Heights 4 years ago. Our neighborhood is one of those nice suburbs where everyone knows each other's business. HOA rules about lawn height, approved paint colors, all that nonsense. But it's safe, with good schools, so we make it work. Our house is a 2-story with about a 1/4 acre of land. Nothing fancy, but it's home. Emily had left around 11 that morning, and I spent a few hours watching football before dragging out all the decoration boxes from the garage. The weather was perfect for December, about 45 degrees, crisp but not freezing. I figured I'd knock it all out before they got back around 7. I started working around 2 in the afternoon. I had a system, lights along the front gutters first, then the bushes, trees, and finally the back of the house. I always saved the back for last, because nobody sees it except us. But Emily insists it looks odd if we only decorate the front. By 4:30, I had the entire front and sides done. The sun was already setting. You know how early it gets dark in December. I grabbed my thermos of coffee, took a quick break, and then hauled everything to the backyard. This is where things get weird. I'd positioned my extension ladder against the back of the house and climbed up with my staple gun and a strand of lights. Our backyard has a wooden privacy fence that's about 6 feet tall, and beyond that is just a small patch of woods that separates our neighborhood from another one. Nothing special or creepy about it normally. I was working my way along the gutter line, probably 15 feet up. The sky was almost completely dark by then, but I had my headlamp on and some floodlights from the patio illuminating the yard. I remember thinking I should hurry up because the temperature was dropping. That's when I heard something. At first I thought it was a neighbor's dog or maybe a raccoon rustling around in the bushes near our fence. I paused, listened, then went back to stapling. Then I heard it again, more deliberate this time, like footsteps trying to be quiet. I turned off my headlamp and looked down. About 20 feet away, near our back gate, was a man, just standing there. I could only see his silhouette against the dim light from the neighbor's yard. My first thought wasn't even fear, it was confusion, like maybe it was a neighbor coming to borrow something. But then I realized he wasn't approaching the house or calling out. He was just watching. "Hey," I called out, trying to sound casual but firm. "Can I help you with something?" He didn't respond. He just stood there for maybe 5 more seconds, completely still. Then he started walking, not away from the house, but directly toward my ladder. Not running, just walking with purpose. My brain couldn't process what was happening. Was this guy coming to help me, to talk to me? I remember feeling bizarrely calm, like there must be some reasonable explanation. "Excuse me, this is private property," I said, louder this time. He never said a word, just kept coming. And then, I still can't believe this happened, he reached my ladder and shoved it. Hard, the ladder scraped against the gutter and fell sideways. I dropped the staple gun and barely managed to grab onto the gutter. For a second, I was dangling 15 feet above the ground, my feet kicking at nothing. Somehow, I pulled myself up onto the roof. The gutter bent but held my weight. Now I was trapped on my own roof, and this stranger was standing in my backyard. "What the hell, man?" I shouted, my heart pounding. "I'm calling the cops." He still didn't speak. Instead, he turned toward my house. That's when I noticed our back door was unlocked. I'd been going in and out all afternoon. Before I could even process what was happening, he opened the door and went inside my house. My house, with all our family photos, my kids' rooms, Emily's, jewelry, our lives. I fumbled for my phone in my jacket pocket, my hands shaking so bad I could barely dial 911. The dispatcher answered, and I tried to explain what was happening without sounding completely insane. "There's an intruder in my house," I said, whispering even though I was on the damn roof. "I'm trapped on my roof. He knocked down my ladder, and he's inside my house right now." The dispatcher kept asking me questions, my address, my name. Was I sure I saw someone go in? Did he have a weapon? All I could think was that every second she kept me on the phone was another second this stranger was in my house doing who knows what. "Please hurry," I begged. "I don't know what he's doing in there." She told me to stay on the line, that officers were already on their way. I was trying to stay calm, but my mind was racing with horrible possibilities. What if he was destroying our things? What if he was stealing the Christmas presents I'd already wrapped and hidden? What if he was setting up to wait for my family to come home? That last thought made me panic. I shouted down at the house, "The police are on their way. They'll be here any minute." I don't know if he heard me or not. The house was silent from my perspective. I couldn't see through any windows from where I was perched on the roof. For about 4 minutes, which felt like 4 hours, nothing happened. The dispatcher kept asking if I could see anything, and I kept saying no. Then the back door burst open. The man came running out, not walking like before, but full-on sprinting. He crossed our yard in seconds, leaped over the fence like it was nothing, and disappeared into the neighbor's yard. I tried to describe him to the dispatcher, but I realized I couldn't. Average height, average build, dark clothes. I never saw his face clearly. He was just a shadow person who had violated my home and left me stranded and terrified. About 6 minutes later, I heard sirens. 2 police cars pulled up in front of my house. I had to shout to get their attention because they were knocking on the front door while I was still stuck on the damn roof. One officer stayed outside with me while his partner cleared the house. They found my ladder and put it back up so I could climb down. My legs were so weak I nearly fell on the last few rungs. The officer asked me all the same questions the dispatcher had. Did I know the man? No. Could I describe him? Barely. Did he say anything? No. Why did I think he targeted my house? I had no idea. Then came the weirdest part. The officer who had searched inside came back out and said, "Sir, nothing seems to be disturbed or missing. Are you sure someone was in there?" I walked through my entire house with them. They were right. Nothing was taken. Nothing was even moved. Every room looked exactly as it had when I'd left to hang lights hours earlier. The master bedroom, the kids' rooms, the office with our computer and iPad, Nothing touched. Every drawer closed, every closet undisturbed. It was like he'd just walked in, stood there, and then ran out when I yelled. The officers took my statement but seemed skeptical. One of them actually asked if I might have imagined it because of the stress of almost falling. I wanted to punch him. I knew what I saw. They said they'd patrol the area more frequently that night, but basically left me with a "call us if anything else happens," as if this wasn't enough. After they left, I had about an hour before Emily and the kids would be home. I thought about calling her, but decided against it. What would I say? Hey, some random guy broke into our house but didn't take anything, and now I'm freaking out. She'd either rush home panicked or think I was exaggerating. So I did something that probably sounds insane. I picked up the ladder, climbed back up, and finished hanging the Christmas lights. My hands were shaking the whole time, and I kept looking over my shoulder, but I finished. I needed something normal to hold onto. When Emily and the kids got home, I told her what happened, and she wanted to call the police again. I told her I already had. She checked on the kids about 20 times that night, and neither of us slept well. We changed all our locks the next day and installed a security system the following week. I bought cameras for every entrance and motion sensor floodlights for the backyard. But here's the thing that still haunts me. What was he doing in there? If he wasn't stealing anything, what did he want? Was he just looking around? Was he planning to come back later? Was he some kind of thrill seeker who gets off on being in strangers' homes? Sometimes I wonder if he left something behind that we haven't found yet. A hidden camera? Some kind of tracking device? I've checked everywhere I can think of, but the thought still creeps me out late at night. It's been almost a year, and I've never seen him again. The police never found anyone matching my vague description. Life went back to normal, I guess. But I still think about him, especially now with Christmas approaching again. I'm dreading hanging those lights next weekend. Emily offered to hire someone this year, but that feels like letting him win somehow. So I'll do it. But you better believe I'm locking every door and taking my phone and a baseball bat up on that roof with me. I've read stories about home invasions before, but they always make sense in some twisted way. People stealing stuff or hurting others for clear reasons. This made no sense. Just a silent stranger who came into my home, did nothing, and ran. Whatever his reason was, I hope I never find out. Story 13. I still get anxious when I drive at night. It's been 4 years since it happened, but I can't shake the feeling that someone's watching me from the darkness beyond my headlights. I've tried therapy. I've tried medication. I've even tried convincing myself it was just some sick prank. But nothing helps. Because deep down, I know what I saw that night wasn't normal. I was 16 then, had just gotten my license a few months before. My parents lived about 2 hours outside the city in this really remote part of the English countryside. You know those roads where there's nothing but fields for miles? That was my route home. I'd been staying with my aunt in the city for a school project, and I was heading back on a Friday evening in late October. I'd made this drive dozens of times before, usually during daylight, but occasionally in the evening like this. My little Ford Fiesta wasn't anything special, but it was reliable, and I knew those roads well enough, or at least I thought I did. It started getting dark earlier than I expected. I remember checking the time. It was only around 6 in the evening, but the clouds were heavy and the sun had already disappeared. My headlights carved a narrow path through the darkness, and I had that weird sensation of being in a bubble, like nothing existed beyond what I could see. About 40 minutes from home, I turned onto this narrow country lane. It's one of those single-track roads with occasional passing places, hedgerows on both sides, and literally nothing around for miles. No streetlights, no houses, just fields and more fields. I remember thinking I should text my mum to let her know I was on my way, but there was no signal out there. Never is. I was driving maybe 40 miles per hour, not too fast because the road was windy, and I'd seen deer a few times before. I had the radio on low, some pop song I can't even remember now. And that's when I noticed the first flash of light in my rearview mirror. At first I thought it was another car coming up behind me, but it didn't seem right. The light was too bright, too white, and it wasn't steady like headlights. It flashed once, then again, like someone was signaling. I slowed down a bit, thinking maybe there was a problem on the road ahead. That's when I saw them. In the darkness ahead, right in the middle of the narrow lane, were 4 people standing in a line across the road. A human roadblock. They were just standing there, not moving, not saying anything, just blocking the entire width of the road. My headlights illuminated them, and I felt this cold dread wash over me. They were all wearing these bright white masks. Not Halloween masks or animal masks or anything with features. Just plain, white, featureless masks that seemed to glow in my headlights, the kind that cover your entire face with just slits for eyes. 2 of them, the ones on the ends, were holding something. At first, I couldn't tell what, but as I got closer, I realized they looked like baseball bats or cricket bats, something long and solid. Another one was holding what looked like a powerful torch or spotlight, the source of the flashing I'd seen. I felt my heart drop into my stomach. This was not normal. This was not kids messing around. These were adults, and they were deliberately blocking the road in the middle of nowhere. I took my foot off the accelerator, and the car started to slow. For a split second, I actually considered stopping. That's how programmed we are to follow social norms, even when every instinct is screaming danger. But then one of them took a step forward, and I snapped out of it. I had no phone signal. The nearest house was miles away. It was just me and them on this pitch-black road. I had 2 choices: slow down and risk whatever they had planned, or floor it and hope they'd move. I chose the second option. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel, but I pressed the accelerator to the floor. The Fiesta wasn't powerful, but it lurched forward with a whine of protest. I aimed straight for a gap between 2 of them, praying they'd jump out of the way. 2 of them did leap aside at the last second. I remember seeing one mask turn to follow me as I shot past, the empty eye slits seeming to stare right through me. But the other 2, they started running after my car, actually chasing it. Who does that? I was going maybe 50, 60 miles per hour by then, taking the curves far too fast, but I couldn't stop. In my rearview mirror, I could see the flashlight beam bouncing as one of them ran after me, getting smaller and smaller until it vanished around a bend. My hands were sweating so much the steering wheel felt slippery. My chest was so tight I could barely breathe. I just kept driving, taking corners too fast, praying I wouldn't skid off the road. The whole time, I kept checking my mirror, terrified I'd see headlights appear. Because that was the thing. There were no cars parked nearby, no buildings, nothing that would explain where these people had come from or how they'd gotten there. About 5 minutes after I'd passed them, I felt the car start to handle strangely. It was pulling to one side, and there was a rhythmic thumping noise. I knew immediately something was wrong with a tire, but there was no way in hell I was stopping. not until I reached somewhere safe. I drove the remaining 35 minutes home on what I later discovered was not one, but two damaged tires. The car was making awful noises by the time I pulled into my parents' driveway, and I was in such a state that I couldn't even turn the engine off properly. I just sat there, shaking uncontrollably, until my dad came out to see what was going on. I remember stumbling out of the car and just collapsing into his arms, sobbing so hard I couldn't speak. My mum appeared, and they both helped me inside. It took nearly half an hour before I could tell them what happened. Dad went out to check the car while Mum called the police. When Dad came back in, his face was white. He'd found nails, actual nails, embedded in both tires on the right side of the car. Not random nails like you might run over by accident. These were large, heavy-duty nails that had been deliberately placed, probably in some kind of board or strip that I'd run over. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a trap. The police came about an hour later. They took my statement and went to investigate, but of course by then, whoever it was had long gone. They found evidence that vehicles had been parked in a field entrance about half a mile from where I'd seen the masked people, tire tracks and cigarette butts. They also found a crude nail strip like my dad had suspected. For weeks afterward, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing those blank white masks in my dreams. I'd wake up gasping for air, convinced someone was standing over my bed. I refused to drive anywhere after dark. Even now, 4 years later, I won't drive alone at night in rural areas. The worst part isn't even the memory of what happened. It's the questions I can't answer. Who were those people? What would they have done if I'd stopped? Were they just trying to rob me, or was it something worse? And how did they know someone would be coming down that road at that specific time? The police had theories. Maybe they were watching the junction where I turned off the main road. Maybe they'd targeted other drivers before. They checked reports of similar incidents but found nothing concrete. They increased patrols in the area for a while, but eventually life moved on, for everyone except me. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined how organized it all seemed, but then I remember the nail strip, the way they stood in formation, the fact that they had no visible transport but clearly hadn't walked miles across fields in the dark. This wasn't opportunistic. This was planned. I'm 20 now. I'm at university, living a normal life on the surface. But I've never driven that route again. I take the long way around, adding 40 minutes to my journey just to avoid that stretch of road. I've installed every safety app on my phone. I have a dash cam that records constantly. I carry a personal alarm. But none of it makes me feel safe, because I know something most people don't, that there are people out there who stand in the darkness wearing blank masks, waiting for headlights to appear on empty roads. I still don't know what they wanted from me. But 4 years later, I'm certain of one thing. If I'd stopped that night, I wouldn't be here to tell this story. Story 14. I've never told this story to anyone outside the task force. For almost 40 years, I've kept my mouth shut about what happened on Osceola Peak. But I'm getting older now, and some things just need to be said before I take them to my grave. Back in October of '86, I was serving as a U.S. Marshal based out of Spokane. I'd been with the service for 11 years by then, seen some rough stuff, but nothing like what went down that day. We got the call on a Tuesday morning. My supervisor pulled me into his office, coffee still hot in my hand, and told me I was being assigned to a high-priority fugitive task force. The target was Raymond Ridgway, age 42. He'd killed 4 civilians in a shooting spree at a grocery store in Spokane, then somehow got tipped off about the FBI agents coming for him. shot 2 of them point blank when they showed up at his apartment. Real sick bastard. Intelligence had him hiding out in the Passaton wilderness, way up near the Canadian border, specifically on Osceola Peak, which sits at around 8,500 feet elevation. It's remote as hell up there. Perfect place to disappear if you know what you're doing, and apparently Ridgway did. He'd been some kind of wilderness survival expert in his younger days, even wrote articles for outdoor magazines before whatever happened in his brain to turn him into a killer. The task force they put together was serious business. 4 U.S. Marshals, including me, 6 FBI agents, 3 state troopers, and 2 detectives from Spokane PD. We met for a briefing at 5 that morning in a conference room that smelled like old coffee and sweat. I remember the FBI special agent in charge, Dawson, standing at the front of the room with a map of the wilderness area taped to the wall. "Ridgway is considered armed and extremely dangerous," he said, tapping the map where Osceola Peak was marked with a red X. "We have reliable intelligence placing him in a cave system near the summit. The plan is to approach from the south face, secure the perimeter, and take him alive if possible." Someone asked how reliable the intelligence was. Turns out a hiker had spotted someone matching Ridgway's description 3 days earlier and reported it when he got back to civilization. Not exactly rock solid, but it was all we had. We mobilized at dawn, starting from Highway 20 and working our way deeper into the wilderness. I remember the morning being unusually cold for October, with frost covering the ground and our breath coming out in white clouds. The hike was brutal, 8 miles of increasingly steep terrain with full tactical gear. By noon, we were only halfway up the mountain, stopping every so often to catch our breath in the thinning air. My partner for the operation was Jim Kovacs, another marshal with about 15 years on the job. Good guy, steady under pressure. We'd worked together on a couple of other fugitive cases before. "You believe this shit?" Jim whispered to me during one of our breaks. "All this manpower for one guy?" I shrugged. "He killed 2 feds. They take that personally." Around 2 in the afternoon, we approached the base of the steepest part of the mountain. That's when things started getting weird. At first, I thought I was seeing things, what looked like small, dark shapes scattered across the forest floor ahead of us. As we got closer, I realized they were animals, dead animals. There must have been dozens of them, squirrels, birds, even a few rabbits and foxes just lying there on the ground. They weren't mangled or torn apart, no blood. They looked like they had just stopped, like someone had hit a pause button on them mid-life. "What the hell?" Jim muttered, kneeling down to examine a dead robin. "No visible injuries." One of the FBI agents, Michaels, I think his name was, came over to see what we were looking at. "Jesus, what do you think killed them?" "No idea," I said, "but they're not decomposing. This happened recently." That's when I noticed how quiet it had gotten. No bird song, no rustling in the underbrush. Nothing but the sound of our own breathing and equipment. Agent Dawson made his way over, took one look at the dead animals, and his face hardened. He got on his radio and had a brief, hushed conversation with someone. I couldn't hear what was said, but when he turned back to us, his expression was all business. "We continue the operation as planned," he announced. "Ridgway probably killed these animals for food or sport. Let's move." It didn't sit right with me. These animals weren't killed for food. They weren't skinned or dressed. They were just dead. But orders were orders, so we kept climbing. The dead animals continued to appear as we ascended, more frequent the higher we went. By the time we reached 4,000 feet, we were stepping over them every few yards. Birds that looked like they'd dropped mid-flight, squirrels frozen in natural poses. None of them showed any signs of decay, despite the fact that some must have been there for days based on the positions we found them in. Around 4 in the afternoon, we reached a plateau about 500 feet below the summit. Dawson called for a final equipment check before the approach to the cave system where Ridgway was supposedly hiding. "Remember," he said, "this man has nothing to lose. Approach with extreme caution." We spread out into our assigned formation and began the final ascent. The terrain here was rocky and exposed, with less vegetation. Fewer dead animals, too, which was a small mercy. The wind had picked up, whipping across the mountainside and cutting through our tactical gear like it was nothing. My position was in the second wave, about 20 yards behind the front line. As we crested the final ridge before the summit, I saw the mouth of the cave, a dark gash in the rocky face of the mountain, maybe 6 feet tall and twice as wide. The first team approached cautiously, weapons drawn. FBI agent Carson took point, with Marshal Torres right behind him. They disappeared into the darkness of the cave while the rest of us secured the perimeter. Minutes passed, 5, then 10. No radio contact, no sounds from inside. Dawson was about to send in the second team when Carson emerged, waving us forward. "We found him," he called out. "He's just sitting in there." We moved in carefully, flashlights sweeping the interior of the cave. It was larger inside than it looked from the entrance, extending maybe 30 feet back before narrowing into what might have been a tunnel deeper into the mountain. The air inside was strangely warm and carried a metallic smell that reminded me of pennies or blood, though there was no visible blood anywhere. And there, at the back of the main chamber, sat Raymond Ridgway. He was just sitting cross-legged on the stone floor, rocking slightly back and forth. He wore dirty jeans and a flannel shirt that had seen better days. His beard had grown out wild and unkempt, but his face, that's what I remember most clearly. His expression was completely blank, eyes open but unfocused, like he was looking at something 1,000 miles away. "Raymond Ridgway," Dawson announced, "you're under arrest for the murders of—" Ridgway didn't respond, didn't even seem to register our presence, just kept rocking back and forth, back and forth. Marshal Torres stepped forward. "Ridgway, on your feet." When there was still no response, Torres reached out and put a hand on Ridgway's shoulder. What happened next happened so fast I barely had time to process it. The moment Torres touched him, Ridgway's body went rigid. Then Torres suddenly collapsed, his body convulsing violently on the cave floor, foam bubbling from his mouth. "Man down!" someone shouted, and 2 agents rushed to Torres' side while the rest of us trained our weapons on Ridgway. But Ridgway hadn't moved to attack. He was still sitting there, only now he was looking directly at us. And he was smiling. Not a normal smile. His lips were stretched too wide, showing too many teeth. It wasn't the smile of a human being. It was the smile of something wearing human skin. "On the ground, now!" Dawson bellowed, his weapon aimed at Ridgway's chest. Still smiling, Ridgway slowly laid himself down on the ground, arms out to his sides. We cuffed him without resistance while Torres continued seizing on the ground nearby. "We need emergency evac," Dawson barked into his radio. "Officer down, possible medical emergency." They had to carry Torres out of the cave. His seizure had stopped, but he was completely unconscious, his breathing shallow. Ridgway walked out under his own power, that unnatural smile never leaving his face. He didn't say a word, not one single word. The helicopter arrived 30 minutes later, touching down on a relatively flat area about a quarter-mile from the cave. They loaded Torres in first, then Ridgway, secured between two FBI agents. The rest of us would hike back down since there wasn't room for everyone. As the helicopter lifted off, I caught Ridgway looking down at me through the window. He wasn't smiling anymore. His expression was pitying, like he knew something terrible that I didn't. It sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the mountain air. The hike down was mostly silent. Nobody seemed to want to talk about what we'd seen. The dead animals were still there, still unnaturally preserved. I remember thinking they looked almost like warning signs that we had stupidly ignored. When we finally made it back to base camp, we learned that Torres was in critical condition at Sacred Heart Medical Center in Spokane. He remained in a coma for a week, and when he finally woke up, he had no memory of what happened in the cave. No memory of the entire day, in fact. The doctors called it a neurological event of unknown origin. Ridgway was imprisoned at a maximum security facility. From what I heard, he never spoke again. Not during interrogation, not during his trial, not to the prison psychologists who tried to evaluate him. He just sat in his cell, rocking back and forth, sometimes smiling that terrible smile. The official report explained away the dead animals as Ridgway hunting for food. Torres's seizure was listed as coincidental, unrelated to the case. The metallic smell in the cave? Not mentioned at all. Everything wrapped up nice and neat, nothing to see here. But I know what I saw, and in the 40 years since that day, I've come to believe that what we found on Osceola Peak wasn't just a man hiding from the law. It was something else. Something wearing Raymond Ridgway like a suit. I requested the full case files a few years before I retired. Most of it was redacted, pages and pages of black marker. The cave was supposedly investigated by a special FBI team the day after we left, but whatever they found never made it into any report I could access. Torres transferred to a desk job after he recovered, never went back to field work. I ran into him at a law enforcement conference in '92 and tried to ask him about that day. He shut down completely, made an excuse, and walked away. The fear in his eyes was real. I've kept my mouth shut all these years because who would believe me? But I'll tell you this, there are things in this world that we're not meant to understand. Things that the authorities know about, but choose to keep hidden from the public. Not just dangerous people, but dangerous truths. I still dream about that cave, sometimes. About the unnatural silence surrounding all those perfectly preserved dead animals. About the look in Ridgway's eyes when he smiled at us. And I wake up with that same metallic taste in my mouth, like old pennies or blood. Whatever happened on Osceola Peak that day, whatever we disturbed or encountered, it wasn't human. And I'm not convinced we actually caught it. Story 15. I still get anxious going to the mall alone during the holidays. What happened 2 years ago completely changed how I feel about busy public places, especially around Christmas. I know it sounds stupid to some people. It was just some creepy guy. But when you're the one being targeted, it feels like your whole world shrinks down to just you and the threat. I've never posted about this before, but I need to get it off my chest. I was 20 at the time, working part-time at a coffee shop while taking classes at the community college. It was December 23rd, and I'd been putting off buying a gift for my Aunt Carol. We weren't super close, but she was hosting Christmas dinner that year, and showing up empty-handed wasn't an option. My mom would have killed me. The Westfield shopping center was absolute chaos that day. I remember circling the parking lot for almost 20 minutes before squeezing into a spot so far from the entrance I could barely see the store signs. The winter air bit at my face as I walked across the parking lot, and I remember thinking that was the worst part of my day. If only. Inside was even worse, people rushing in every direction, Christmas music blaring so loud it was distorted, and that distinct mall smell of perfume samples, pretzels, and desperation. I headed straight for Bath & Body Works, since Aunt Carol was obsessed with their seasonal candles. Simple gift, in and out, that was the plan. I was browsing the holiday collection when I first noticed him. He was standing, near the store entrance, just watching. Not shopping, not talking on his phone, just staring in my direction. At first I didn't think much of it. Maybe he was waiting for someone, or trying to figure out what to get his girlfriend. But when I moved to a different display, he shifted too. He was maybe in his 30s, with a completely shaved head and these intense eyes that seemed to follow my every move. He wore a dark green jacket that looked too heavy for the heated mall, and he kept fidgeting with something in his pocket. What really unsettled me was how he wasn't even trying to hide that he was watching me. Most creeps at least pretend to be looking at something else. I grabbed a random pine-scented candle and headed to the checkout, hoping he'd stay put. The line was painfully long, at least 12 people ahead of me. As I waited, I felt someone move into the space behind me, standing way too close. I could feel breath on my neck. "That candle doesn't suit you," a voice said, low, with this weird raspy quality to it. I turned around and there he was, the bald man, standing so close I could see a small scar above his left eyebrow and smell something sour on his breath. "Excuse me?" I said, trying to sound confident, but hearing my own voice crack. "You seem more like a vanilla girl to me." "Sweet." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes at all. I'm good at reading people. I mumbled something about the candle being for someone else and faced forward again, my heart pounding. The line seemed to be moving in slow motion. I could feel him still standing too close, and when I glanced back, he was staring directly at me with this unsettling half-smile. "I'm Derek," he said, not waiting for me to ask. "What's your name?" I ignored him, pretending to check my phone, hoping he'd take the hint. "Not very friendly during the season of giving, are you?" He chuckled. "That's okay. I like challenges." The woman in front of me must have sensed something was off, because she glanced back with a concerned look. I gave her a tight smile, trying to communicate that everything was fine, even though it absolutely wasn't. When I finally reached the register, I paid as quickly as possible, forgetting the gift receipt in my hurry. As I left the store, I glanced back and saw he wasn't following me. Relief washed over me, and I decided to cut through the food court to get to the exit nearest my car. I was passing the pretzel stand when I heard his voice again. "Leaving so soon? I thought we could grab a drink." He appeared beside me out of nowhere, walking in step with me like we were together. My stomach dropped. "No thanks," I said firmly, picking up my pace. "Come on, it's Christmas. Nobody should be alone." He reached for my arm, but I pulled away before he could touch me. "I'm meeting my boyfriend," I lied, scanning the crowd for security guards or anyone who might help. "No, you're not." The certainty in his voice made my skin crawl. "I watched you come in alone. Your car's a blue Honda Civic parked in Section E." My blood ran cold. He'd been watching me since I arrived. How long had he been following me? Did he specifically target me in the parking lot? "Leave me alone," I said, louder this time, hoping someone would notice. "Don't be like that, Melissa." I stopped dead in my tracks. "How do you know my name?" He smiled, revealing slightly yellowed teeth. "You told me, remember?" I definitely hadn't told him my name. Not once. I felt sick, like the floor was tilting beneath me. Had he heard someone call me by name somewhere? Had he been following me before today? "I have mace," I bluffed, reaching into my purse. "No, you don't." That same confidence. "But you do have a pepper spray keychain that's buried at the bottom of your bag. You bought it after that campus assault last spring, but you've never actually practiced using it." Terror washed over me in waves. I couldn't breathe. How could he possibly know that? I'd only told my roommate about buying that keychain. People streamed past us, wrapped up in their own Christmas shopping dramas, completely unaware of what was happening. I spotted a mall security guard about 50 feet away and started moving in that direction. "I just want to talk," Derek said, keeping pace with me. "Why are you being so difficult? Most girls would be flattered by the attention." "I'm not interested," I said firmly. "Stop following me right now." "Or what?" His tone changed, hardened. The fake friendliness vanished. "You're going to scream? Make a scene? Nobody cares, Melissa. Look around." He was right about one thing. The mall was so packed and noisy that even if I screamed, it might just blend into the chaos. But he was wrong about nobody caring. As we approached a crowded area near the center court Christmas display, I suddenly stopped and turned to face him directly. "Stop following me!" I shouted as loudly as I could. The effect was immediate. At least 20 people turned to look, conversation halting around us. An older woman put her hand on my shoulder and asked if I was okay. 2 teenage boys stopped taking selfies with the mall Santa to stare at us. The security guard I'd spotted earlier started heading our way. Derek's face changed. The confidence drained away, replaced by something cold and calculating. He took a step back, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Crazy bitch," he muttered, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I was just asking where the food court was." Before the security guard could reach us, Derek melted into the crowd. The woman with her hand on my shoulder asked if I wanted her to stay with me, but I was so embarrassed and shaken that I just thanked her and said I was fine. I gave a brief description to the security guard, who promised to alert the other guards, but we both knew the chances of finding one man in that crowded mall were slim. I should have filed a report. I should have waited for mall security to escort me to my car. I should have called someone to come get me, but all I wanted was to get out of there as fast as possible. The weight of all those eyes on me, the humiliation of having screamed in public, it was overwhelming. I practically ran to the exit, clutching my shopping bag so tightly my knuckles were white. The winter air that had seemed so biting earlier now barely registered as I speed-walked across the parking lot, constantly checking over my shoulder. When I reached my car, which was indeed a blue Honda Civic exactly as he'd said, I fumbled with my keys, dropping them twice before managing to unlock the door. I threw my bag onto the passenger seat and locked the doors immediately after getting in. For a full minute, I just sat there, hands shaking on the steering wheel, trying to catch my breath. I checked all my mirrors, scanned the surrounding cars, looked for any sign of him. Nothing. Maybe he'd given up. Maybe the public confrontation had scared him off. I started the engine, blasting the heat to stop my shivering, though I wasn't sure if I was trembling from cold or fear. As I prepared to back out of my spot, I glanced at the car parked perpendicular to mine, an older gray van with tinted windows. The driver's window rolled down, and there he was, Derek, sitting behind the wheel, looking directly at me, and he was smiling. Not the fake, friendly smile from before, but something else entirely, wide and unhinged, revealing those yellowed teeth. His eyes never blinked as he stared at me, the smile stretching his face in a way that looked painful. I froze completely. Our cars were so close that we were practically face to face, separated only by 2 panes of glass. I couldn't back out without getting closer to his van. I couldn't pull forward because another car was parked in front of me. For what felt like an eternity, we just stared at each other, me paralyzed with fear, him grinning that horrible grin. Then, slowly, deliberately, he raised his hand and waved at me like we were old friends spotting each other across a restaurant. Something snapped in me then. I threw my car into reverse, not even checking if anyone was behind me, and yanked the wheel hard, scraping against the car next to me, but creating just enough space to maneuver out. I didn't care about the damage. I just needed to get away. As I sped toward the exit, I checked my rearview mirror obsessively, terrified I'd see the gray van following me. But there was no sign of him. I took a completely random route home, making unnecessary turns and doubling back several times to make sure I wasn't being followed. When I finally got home, I sat in my driveway for 15 minutes, scanning the street before I worked up the courage to go inside. I called my roommate, who was away visiting family, and broke down completely while trying to explain what had happened. She convinced me to file a police report, which I did the next day. But without a last name or license plate number, there wasn't much they could do. "Be more aware of your surroundings," the officer told me, as if I hadn't been hyper-aware of every single person around me since it happened. It's been 2 years, and I've never seen Derek again. I've moved twice since then and changed my social media settings to private. I never shop alone during the holidays now, and I always park near security cameras. But the thing that haunts me most isn't the stalking or the personal information he somehow knew about me. It's that smile in the parking lot, that wide, unnatural grin that seemed to say, "This isn't over." Sometimes I still see it in my dreams, and I wake up checking that my doors are locked. If the mall hadn't been so crowded that day, if I hadn't made a scene, I don't want to think about what might have happened. I'm grateful for the holiday crowd that probably saved me from something much worse. Story 16. I still can't sleep most nights. It's been over 30 years, but when I close my eyes, I still see that thing. I still smell it. I've never shared this with anyone outside of the police reports and my therapist, but I need to get this off my chest once and for all. Back in '89, I was working as a landlord in the East Village. Not the gentrified hipster paradise it is now. This was the gritty, dangerous New York that tourists avoided. I managed 5 walk-up buildings, all crumbling brick tenements with bad plumbing and worse heating. The rent was cheap, and the tenants were a mixed bag. Artists, immigrants, addicts, elderly folks who'd lived there for decades. I wasn't the kind of landlord who got involved in their lives. Rent on time, don't destroy the place, we're good. Albert Russo lived in one of my buildings on East 7th, apartment 3B. He was in his 60s, always wore the same beige sweater vest, no matter the weather, and kept to himself. Paid his rent in cash, always on the 1st of the month. Never complained, never caused trouble. Perfect tenant, really. I'd see him occasionally shuffling down the street with his plastic grocery bags, or sitting alone in the park feeding birds. He'd nod, I'd nod back. That was our relationship for almost 4 years. Then one day in October, I got a call from a woman named Clara who said she was Albert's niece. She sounded worried, said she hadn't heard from him in weeks, which was unusual. They apparently spoke every Sunday without fail. She lived in Chicago, couldn't just come check on him herself, asked if I would knock on his door, make sure he was okay. I told her I'd swing by that afternoon. I wasn't especially concerned, Older tenants sometimes went to visit family or ended up in the hospital without telling anyone. But something in her voice made me uneasy. She sounded genuinely frightened, not just worried. When I knocked on Albert's door that afternoon, there was no answer. I pressed my ear against it and couldn't hear movement inside. I slipped a note under his door asking him to call me and went about my day. When Clara called again the next morning, I could hear the panic in her voice. She'd booked a flight to New York, would be arriving that evening. Could I please meet her at Albert's apartment? I agreed, figuring we'd discover he was fine, maybe just hard of hearing or something. I met Clara outside the building around 7 that night. She was a small woman in her 40s with dark circles under her eyes and hands that wouldn't stop fidgeting. She thanked me for meeting her, then grew quiet as we climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. The hallway was dimly lit, with that musty smell old buildings get. As we approached 3B, I noticed something I hadn't before, a faint, unpleasant odor seeping from under the door. My stomach tightened. I knocked hard. "Mr. Russo? Albert? It's Tony, your landlord. Your niece Clara is here." "Nothing." Clara looked at me with wide eyes. "Something's wrong," she whispered. "I know something's wrong." I took out my keys. "I'm going to check inside. Stay here if you want." "No," she said firmly. "I'm coming with you." The moment I unlocked the door and pushed it open, we were hit with the most overwhelming stench I've ever encountered. It was like rotten meat, sewage, and something else I couldn't identify all mixed together. Clara covered her mouth and nose with her sleeve. I tried not to gag as I pushed the door open wider. The apartment was a disaster. Trash bags piled in corners, dirty dishes stacked in the sink and on the counter, flies buzzing everywhere. Albert had always been so neat, so tidy. This wasn't right. "Uncle Albert?" Clara called, her voice muffled by her sleeve. "Are you here?" The apartment was small, just a living room with a kitchenette, a bathroom, and a bedroom. I flicked on lights as we moved through. The living room was empty except for a worn armchair and a small TV. The bathroom door was open, also empty. Then we reached the bedroom door, which was closed. The smell was strongest here. I hesitated, hand on the doorknob, suddenly not wanting to see what was on the other side. Clara nodded at me, her eyes watering. Whether from the smell or from fear, I couldn't tell. I opened the door. The bedroom was dark except for the glow of a small lamp in the corner. It took my eyes a moment to adjust, but I could make out a shape on the bed under a stained sheet. Flies swarmed around it, the buzz amplified in the small room. I knew immediately what we'd found, or what I thought we'd found. Albert, dead for days, maybe weeks. But something wasn't right. The shape under the sheet. It didn't look quite human. It was oddly lumpy, misshapen. "Is that?" Clara whispered, unable to finish her question. I stepped forward, trying to breathe through my mouth. "I think we need to call the police." But before I could back out of the room, Clara pushed past me. "I need to see him," she said. "Ma'am, I really don't think—" But she was already at the bedside, reaching for the sheet. Before I could stop her, she pulled it back. What we saw underneath will haunt me until the day I die. It looked like a human form, but wrong. The skin was bloated, splitting in places, with a greenish-black tinge. The face was partially caved in, empty eye sockets staring at the ceiling. But the worst part was that I could see the seams, actual stitches and thin metal wires holding pieces together. This wasn't a decomposing body. It was something else entirely. Clara screamed. Not a movie scream, but a raw, primal sound I've never heard before or since. She stumbled backward into me, then pushed past and ran out of the apartment. I heard her footsteps pounding down the hallway, then the stairwell door slamming. I couldn't move. I couldn't look away from the monstrosity on the bed. My brain was trying to process what I was seeing. It looked like a corpse, but something was fundamentally wrong about it. The proportions were off. The skin texture varied in places, and those wires, I don't remember making the 911 call. I must have gone into some kind of autopilot. I just remember standing in the hallway outside the apartment, waiting, the smell still clinging to my clothes and hair. The police arrived first, then paramedics. They entered the apartment with masks and gloves. When they came out, one of the officers pulled me aside. "Sir, what exactly is your relationship to the deceased?" "I'm the landlord," I said automatically. "But that's not Albert Russo in there." The officer exchanged looks with his partner. "We need to call this in," he said. More police arrived, then people in suits who I later learned were forensic specialists. They spent hours in the apartment while I waited, giving my statement again and again. Around midnight, a woman in a white paper suit approached me. "Mr. Vitale, I'm Dr. Patel with the medical examiner's office. I need to ask you some questions." I nodded, exhausted. "The object on the bed is not human remains," she said carefully. "What?" I felt like I'd been punched. "What do you mean? What is it?" "We're still determining that, but it appears to be composed of animal remains, various animals arranged and preserved in a specific way." My stomach turned. "What kind of animals?" "Smaller mammals, birds. We'll know more after laboratory analysis." She hesitated. "Mr. Vitale, is there any indication where the tenant might be?" I shook my head. "No, he's just gone." I tried calling Clara that night, but she didn't answer. When she finally called back the next morning, her voice was hollow. "They told me what it was," she said. "That thing on the bed." "Did they find Albert?" I asked. "No." She paused. "They want me to come to the precinct today to answer more questions about Uncle Albert's habits." When I asked what she meant, she was quiet for so long I thought she'd hung up. "He was always collecting things," she finally said. "Dead things, butterflies, beetles. My mom, his sister, always said he had a morbid fascination, but I never thought—" She trailed off. A week later, the lab results came back. The sculpture on Albert's bed was made from dozens of animal corpses: pigeons, rats, squirrels, raccoons, even cats and dogs that matched descriptions of missing pets from the neighborhood. They'd been skinned, preserved, and stitched together with wire to form a crude human shape. The face had been crafted from what they believed was a raccoon's skull and a cat's jaw, with bird bones forming the cheeks and brow. They never found Albert. Officers searched the building, questioned other tenants, checked hospitals and morgues. Nothing. It was like he'd vanished into thin air, leaving only that grotesque creation behind. Clara stayed in New York for 2 weeks, dealing with the police and Albert's affairs. I helped her clean out the apartment. After forensics was done, of course. We didn't talk much. What was there to say? I could tell she was struggling with the same questions I was. Had her uncle created that monstrosity? If so, why? And where was he now? Before she left, she gave me a small box of photos she'd found in a drawer. "I can't take these," she said. I can't." Later that night, I looked through them. They were mostly old snapshots of landscapes, buildings, pigeons in the park. Normal stuff. But in the middle of the stack, I found something that made my blood run cold. It was a Polaroid of Albert's bedroom, taken from the doorway. On the bed was what looked like the beginning stages of the sculpture. just a crude framework of wire and small animal bones. But what haunted me wasn't the sculpture itself. It was the shadow visible on the wall beside it, a tall, thin shadow that didn't match Albert's stocky frame. A shadow that couldn't possibly have been cast by anyone in the room, based on the angle of the light. I kept in touch with Clara for a while. The police investigation stalled. No trace of Albert was ever found. Eventually, Clara stopped answering my calls. I don't blame her. Some things you just want to forget. I rented out the apartment again 6 months later, after a complete renovation. I never told the new tenants what happened there. Maybe that was wrong of me, but what would I have said? It's been over 30 years now. I've moved out of the city, retired to a quiet town upstate. But I still think about Albert Russo and that thing on his bed. Sometimes I wonder if Clara knew more than she let on. Why did she call me first instead of the police? Was there a history of strange behavior she was aware of? I've considered reaching out to her again, now that so much time has passed. But what would be the point? Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Some questions are better left unasked. But I still can't sleep most nights. And I still check under my bed. Story 17. I've never been able to shake what happened during our camping trip 3 years ago. I'm writing this because I need to get it off my chest, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar or can make sense of it. I still have trouble sleeping most nights. My buddies Craig, Tanner, and I had been planning this trip for months. Nothing fancy, just a weekend getaway in the Tennessee backcountry. We're all from Knoxville and needed a break from our jobs. I'd been working overtime at the warehouse. Craig was stressed about his upcoming wedding, and Tanner just wanted to fish and drink beer away from his roommates for a while. We picked a spot about 2 hours from home, in a secluded area that Craig's cousin had told him about. It wasn't an official campground, just a clearing in the woods near a small creek, far enough from the main roads that we could feel like we were actually getting away from everything. The drive there took longer than expected because the last 7 miles were on dirt roads that got progressively narrower. My pickup truck handled it fine, but we joked about how nobody would hear us scream out there if anything happened. If only we knew how unfunny that joke would turn out to be. We arrived around 3 in the afternoon on Saturday. The spot was perfect, a flat area surrounded by thick trees with a small fire pit someone had made previously using rocks from the creek. The weather was great for early October, cool but not cold, and the leaves were just starting to turn. We set up our tents, gathered firewood, and Tanner immediately headed to the creek with his fishing gear, while Craig and I arranged the campsite. Nothing felt off at first. It was peaceful, with birds chirping and the occasional rustle in the undergrowth from squirrels or other small animals. The sun filtered through the trees in that golden way it does in the late afternoon. We were completely alone, exactly what we wanted. Around dusk, Tanner came back with 3 decent-sized trout, and we cleaned them by the creek. We cooked them over the fire along with some potatoes wrapped in foil and cracked open a few beers. The conversation flowed easily as we caught up on each other's lives. Craig showed us pictures of the venue for his wedding. Tanner told us about this girl he'd been seeing, and I just enjoyed being away from the constant pressure of work. Looking back, I remember feeling like we were being watched at one point during the evening. I even turned around to check the tree line behind me, but I didn't see anything. I brushed it off as paranoia from too many horror movies. We were in the woods. Of course, there were animals around watching us. That's normal, right? We stayed up until around 11, drinking and talking around the fire. Nothing weird happened. No strange noises, no unexplained lights, nothing out of the ordinary. We doused the fire carefully, made sure everything was secure, and went to our tents. I remember checking that my truck was locked before turning in, mostly out of habit. I fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from the day and slightly buzzed from the beers. I woke up around 5:30 in the morning. The woods were still dark, with just a hint of gray light starting to filter through the trees. At first, I wasn't sure what had woken me. Maybe a noise, or just my body clock being used to early warehouse shifts. I needed to pee, so I unzipped my tent and stepped out into the chilly morning air. That's when I saw it. My truck was about 20 feet from our tents, and even in the dim light, I could see something was wrong. There was something on the hood, something pink and wet. My first thought was that someone had thrown garbage on my vehicle, and I was annoyed as I walked closer. What I saw when I got near enough to make it out clearly will haunt me for the rest of my life. Stretched across the hood of my truck was what appeared to be a skinned animal. The raw pink flesh was still wet, and streaks of blood ran down my windshield like crimson tears. The animal had been completely skinned. No fur, no head, no legs, just the main body portion meticulously laid out on the hood of my truck. I froze, unable to process what I was seeing. My stomach lurched, and I barely managed to turn away before throwing up my dinner from the night before. The smell hit me then, raw meat and something else, something chemical almost, like when you walk into a butcher shop, but worse because this was out in the open air where you don't expect that smell. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get my phone out of my pocket. I turned on the flashlight to get a better look, immediately wishing I hadn't. The skin had been removed with precision. This wasn't the work of another animal or some random act. It was deliberate. Someone had skinned this animal, I still don't know what kind it was, maybe a raccoon or possum, and placed it on my truck with purpose. I heard one of the tents unzip behind me, and Tanner's sleepy voice called out, "What are you doing up so early, man?" I couldn't find words. I just pointed at the truck, the flashlight beam shaking wildly in my hand. "Holy shit," he whispered when he saw it. "What the fuck is that?" His voice woke Craig, who emerged from his tent rubbing his eyes. When he saw what we were looking at, his face went completely white. "We need to go," he said immediately. "Right now." None of us argued. We broke camp in record time, throwing our stuff into bags without folding anything. The tents were practically ripped from the ground and stuffed into their sacks. All the while, I kept looking over my shoulder, scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. The woods were eerily silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just the sound of our panicked breathing and hurried movements. I didn't want to touch the thing on my hood, but I couldn't drive with it there. Using a stick, I tried to push it off, but it was stuck somehow, as if someone had used the blood as an adhesive. Craig found an old t-shirt in his bag, and we used it to grab the carcass and pull it off, revealing a dark stain on the white paint of my truck. We threw the remains as far into the woods as we could and used water from our bottles to clean the worst of the blood off the windshield. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I kept expecting someone to emerge from the trees at any moment. The drive back was tense and silent. We kept checking the rear-view mirrors, half expecting to see someone following us. About 30 miles from the campsite, we stopped at a gas station to fill up and try to calm down. My heart was still racing, and I felt sick to my stomach. While Craig and Tanner went inside for coffee, I was pumping gas when an older man approached me. He was probably in his 60s, wearing overalls and a faded cap with a local feed store logo. "You boys been camping up in the deep woods?" he asked, nodding toward our gear in the truck bed. I nodded, not really wanting to talk about it. "Saw some blood on your windshield," he continued. "Found something on your vehicle this morning, didn't you?" I stared at him, shock and fear washing over me in equal measure. "How did you know?" He introduced himself as Mr. Harris and explained he'd lived in the area his whole life. "It ain't the first time," he said, his voice low. "Been happening for years. Skinned animals showing up on cars, on porches, always outsiders, people who don't belong in those deep woods." "Who does it?" I asked, my mouth dry. He shrugged. "Some say it's just locals trying to scare off trespassers. Others think it's something else." He paused, looking uncomfortable. "You boys got lucky. Some folks find worse things than animals." Before I could ask what he meant, Craig and Tanner came back, and Mr. Harris nodded politely and walked away. I wanted to follow him to demand more answers, but something in his expression warned me not to push it. On the drive home, I told the guys what Mr. Harris had said. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just local kids playing cruel pranks on campers, or territorial hunters warning us off their preferred grounds. But none of the explanations felt right. When I got home, I scrubbed my truck for hours, trying to remove every trace of blood from the paint and glass. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in my apartment made me jump, convinced that whoever had left that warning had somehow followed me home. Over the next week, I spent hours researching online, looking for similar stories. I found more than I expected. Accounts from various remote areas across the country describing skinned animals left as apparent warnings. Some victims reported feeling watched for weeks after returning home, hearing noises outside their windows at night. None of us has gone camping since. Craig sold all his gear, and Tanner moved to Cincinnati 6 months later for reasons he wouldn't fully explain. We don't talk about that morning anymore, but I know it affected them as deeply as it did me. I still keep my doors locked at night. I still check the hood of my truck every morning before getting in. I still avoid driving past wooded areas after dark, because deep down, I know that whatever placed that skin on my truck wasn't just sending a message. It was watching us, studying our reactions, perhaps deciding our fate. The most terrifying part isn't the memory of that raw, pink flesh stretched across my hood. It's the knowledge that something out there was capable of such calculated cruelty, of such precision in its warning. And sometimes, in the darkest hours of the night, I can't shake the feeling that it's still watching me, waiting for me to forget or to let my guard down. Whatever it wasn't just an animal. Animals don't skin other animals and arrange them on vehicles. There was intelligence behind it, intention. And that's what keeps me up at night, knowing that something or someone was out there in those woods, close enough to approach our camp while we slept, and we never heard a sound. Story 18. I still can't sleep with my blinds open. It's been 15 years since it happened, but I still check every window lock twice before bed, and I still wake up in cold sweats when I hear scratching sounds outside my house. What happened that summer at my grandmother Tana's property in the mountains of Mexico has never left me. I was 8 years old. My family made the trip every summer to Tana's place, a small patch of land sitting at the base of a mountain range near the ancestral Kickapoo territory. It was beautiful during the day, wildflowers, tall grass, birds everywhere. At night, though, the mountains looked like they were watching us. That year was special because the whole family was there. My sisters Amma and Winona, plus all my cousins. Hosa, who was 6, Lona, 10, Cheeto, 16, and Saya, 12. The adults were excited because Tana had just finished building a new house on the property. The old cabin was still there, but now we had this bigger place with actual bedrooms and indoor plumbing. On our third night there, I woke up to screaming. Not the kind of screaming you hear when kids are playing. This was pure terror. It was Hosa. My uncle Sani burst into our room where all us younger kids were sleeping on mats, and Hosa was standing on his mattress, pressed against the wall, pointing at the window and sobbing. She was looking at me, he kept saying between gasps. The old lady was looking at me through the bars. Our windows had these decorative iron bars on them, not for security, just a traditional style. Tana turned on the lights while Uncle Sani checked outside. "What old lady, mijo?" Tana asked, trying to calm Hosa down. "The pale one with the long gray hair," Hosa whispered. She pushed her face between the bars and smiled at me. I remember feeling my stomach drop. There was no old lady staying with us. The closest neighbor was miles away. Uncle Sani came back inside looking worried. "There's footprints outside," he said quietly to my dad and Tana. "Bare feet, under every window." The adults thought we couldn't hear, but I did. Uncle Sani said the footprints led toward the mountains. My grandmother's face changed when he said that. She looked scared. I'd never seen her scared before. "Nobody goes near the mountains tomorrow," she announced to everyone. "Not even during the day." I couldn't fall back asleep that night. I kept staring at the window, terrified that I'd see a face pressed against it. The bars that were supposed to be decorative suddenly felt necessary. The next morning, the adults tried to act normal, but you could feel the tension. Tana sat us all down after breakfast and told us something I'll never forget. "Those mountains," she said, pointing to the range. "Behind the property, they twist your mind if you go in unprepared. The old ones knew not to go there without protection. You children will stay near the house, understand?" We all nodded, even though I don't think any of us fully understood what she meant. That afternoon, we were playing near the fence that marked the edge of Tana's property when Lona suddenly froze. She was staring toward the tree line where the mountain foothills began. "There's someone standing there," she whispered. We all looked. At first I didn't see anything. Then I noticed what looked like a person standing perfectly still among the trees, about 50 yards away. The figure was tall and thin, and even from that distance I could tell something was wrong with the way it was standing. Too still, like it wasn't breathing. Cheeto yelled at it, asking who was there. The figure didn't move or respond. After a few seconds, it simply wasn't there anymore. It didn't walk away or hide. It was just gone, like a light switching off. We ran back to the house and told the adults. Uncle Sani and my dad walked all the way to the tree line with rifles, but they found nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing to suggest anyone had been there. That night, the scratching started. It was just after 10 o'clock. We were all inside getting ready for bed when we heard it. A soft, steady scratching sound on the exterior wall. It moved slowly around the house, like someone dragging their fingernails across the stucco. When it reached a window, it would stop for several seconds before continuing. Uncle Sani went outside with his flashlight and gun. The scratching stopped immediately. He circled the entire property but found nothing. As soon as he came back inside, the scratching started again, this time on the opposite side of the house. This continued for nearly an hour. Every time someone went to check, the scratching would stop, only to resume somewhere else minutes later. Eventually, Tana brought out a bundle of herbs, sage, and something else I couldn't identify. She burned it around the house, murmuring words I couldn't understand. After that, the scratching stopped, but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what would make that sound. Human nails would break against the stucco wall. Whatever was out there had something stronger than human fingernails. The next day, Tana wouldn't let any of us play outside. Chido, being 16 and thinking he was already a man, volunteered to patrol the property. He walked the perimeter with his flashlight and hunting rifle, even though it was broad daylight. The adults didn't stop him. I think they were grateful someone was keeping watch. Around noon, Chido came rushing back to the house, out of breath and pale. He'd found something at the very edge of the property, where our land met the beginning of the mountain trail. "There's a circle of dead animals," he said. "Small ones, birds, a rabbit, some mice, all arranged in a perfect circle facing inward." Uncle Sani and my dad went to see. When they came back, they were talking in hushed voices. They confirmed what Chido had seen but tried to explain it away. Maybe a coyote or some other predator had left remains there. But they didn't believe that, and neither did we. That evening, Tana insisted we all sleep in the main room of the new house. She pushed all the furniture against the walls and laid out blankets on the floor. "Safety in numbers," she said. No one argued. As the sun set, Uncle Sani and my dad took turns walking around the property, checking windows and doors. Tana kept burning her herbs, placing small bundles on each windowsill. The smell was strong and earthy. We were trying to distract ourselves by playing cards when Saya suddenly gasped. She was facing the window and her face had gone completely white. "There was a hand," she whispered. A pale hand gripped the bars and then disappeared. My dad ran to the window and looked out. Then he went outside, despite Tana telling him not to. When he came back in, his expression told us everything we needed to know. "There are handprints under the window," he said quietly. "Mud handprints, and footprints leading up toward the foothills." "What kind of footprints?" Tana asked. "Human," my dad replied, "but wrong somehow. The stride is too long, and there are places where it looks like something was dragging its feet." That was it for Tana. She announced we were leaving first thing in the morning, cutting our trip short by 4 days. No one protested. That night was the longest of my life. We all huddled together in the main room, with the adults taking turns staying awake. The scratching didn't return, but something worse happened. Around 3 in the morning, when most of us had finally fallen into uneasy sleep, we heard a sound that made my blood freeze. Singing. A woman's voice, soft and distant, singing a lullaby in a language none of us recognized. It seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Tana sat up straight, her eyes wide. "Don't listen," she whispered fiercely. "Cover your ears." We did as we were told, but the singing continued for several minutes before slowly fading away. I'll never forget the sound. Not beautiful exactly, but hypnotic, like it was trying to pull something out of you. At first light, we packed our things and piled into our cars. No one spoke much. As we were about to leave, I saw Tana standing at the edge of her property, staring toward the mountains with an expression I couldn't read, part defiance, part resignation. I asked my mom later why Tana stayed there if the place was so dangerous. My mom explained that Tana believed someone had to guard the boundary, to keep whatever was in the mountains from coming down into the valley. "Some places have a hunger for fear," my mom told me, repeating what Tana had told her. "And if you wander in unprepared, you might find exactly what's been feeding on it." Years later, I learned from my mother that the sightings weren't new. The elders in our family had stories about a spirit from the mountains that took the shape of an old woman. It targeted families especially when there were gatherings, when people were too distracted by celebration to notice what might be sneaking around in the darkness. Tana passed away 5 years after that summer. My parents sold her property because no one else in the family wanted it. Sometimes I wonder about whoever bought that land, if they've seen the pale woman with the long gray hair, if they've heard the scratching or the singing. I still visit